Chapter 121, A Profitable Industry. Lacey's words made Renoli, Kyle, and the Predictor light up with enthusiasm. Until now, they'd only considered the gap between individual combatants and warriors clad in reinforced steel armor. They hadn't stopped to think that, in a large-scale war, it would be the weapons themselves, artillery, rifles, mechanized support, that decided the outcome. That revelation earned Damien instant respect from the three of them. Renoli leaned forward. Damien, your inventions could change everything. With the right firepower behind our Steel Legion, we'd be unbeatable. Kyle nodded eagerly. Not only would we dominate the battlefield, but the sales alone would generate a steady stream of revenue for the Void Cult. We could build supply depots, research outposts, even entire fortresses. The Predictor closed his eyes, as if envisioning the future. Your technology will become our trump card in every engagement. When brute strength and sorcery meet their limits, firepower will tip the scales. Lacey smiled knowingly. Of course, we must also ensure your personal safety. You haven't seen much combat yet, and the moment our enemies learn how vital your inventions are, you'll become their prime target. Damien glanced around at the eager faces surrounding him. He felt a surge of responsibility and a thrill of anticipation. He'd already begun sketching plans for automated turrets and modular armored exoskeletons. Now, with the cult's full backing, he could bring those designs to life. Renoli clapped his hands once. Then it's settled. We'll allocate the old foundry to your team, secure the necessary ore, and recruit more engineers. From this day on, every cannon, every rifle, every piece of battlefield machinery will bear your mark. As the group dispersed to set their plans into motion, Damien bent over his workbench, already lost in equations and schematics. A profitable industry was taking shape, and with it, the future of the Void God religion. Damien had just completed the installation of experimental gravity drives on 16 starfighters, and today marked their first test flights. As each ship soared through the black expanse, collecting performance data, Damien's heart leapt. He'd never seen results like these. The numbers he pulled in afterward were even better than he dared hope. Thrust efficiency up by 15%, maneuverability rivaling the latest prototype fighters, and energy consumption well within safety margins. Word of his success spread fast. Advisors and engineers swarmed around him, their admiration barely contained. They whispered excitedly about the possibilities. If Damien could scale this technology down for the incoming Void God cult recruits, many of whom were notoriously underpowered in their initial training, it could carry them through the dangerous early days. Admittedly, such miniaturization lay beyond current capabilities, but the prophets had long promised that it would come in time. Today's gathering included official delegates from 16 of the galaxy's largest conglomerates. Each had witnessed the test flights firsthand, and by nightfall, all had signed on the dotted line, 100 million credits apiece for an initial batch. Their plan was cautious but ambitious. They'd run a year-long field trial with a small fleet. If no major issues arose, they'd double or even triple their orders. Naturally, the guests pressed Damien about his famed steel armor. Disappointment flickered across their faces when they learned it wasn't for sale. No shock there. Only someone with Damien's ingenuity could design and build such advanced mechanical exoskeletons. Still, they left the summit hoping to strike other deals in the near future, eager to tap into whatever innovations Damien would unveil next. As the delegates departed under a starlit sky, Damien allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. This was only the beginning. Sonia and her partners each put down a $50 million deposit with Tony Stark before departing. Now Tony watched as $800 million cleared into his account, though he knew he hadn't yet earned it. He turned to Sonia. Tonight, I'll have Jarvis send you the factory blueprints, along with a full equipment list. Once construction is ready to start, we'll need to recruit staff and break ground immediately. With a few swift keystrokes, Tony wired $798.5 million to her account and set aside $5 million for his own expenses. I'll make every dollar count, he promised. We can be ready to start building in less than a month. Sonia let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Thank you, Tony. I feel much better knowing you're on this. Tony gave her a confident smile. Then I'll get to work. Moments later, he rocketed into the sky, heading back to his hidden laboratory. There, he would dive into the mountain of starfighter research he'd been gathering, preparing in advance to design and build his own spacecraft. Sonia watched him go, then glanced over at the silent members of the Void cult who remained behind. She paid them no heed. Her next stop was Mr. Cassidy's office to deliver the good news. Climbing into her car, she felt a surge of excitement. The factory plans were moving forward, and a new chapter in starfighter development was about to begin. Damien slipped 5 million credits into his account before he left. He'd never had personal funds. Whenever he wanted resources, he had to submit a proposal to Lord Cassidin. Cassidin almost always approved, but the formality remained. Now that Damien's venture had finally broken the 800 million mark, tucking away a 5 million cushion felt only natural. 800 million? That's what we've made so far? One voice murmured. Is raking in that kind of cash really that easy? Another asked. If someone laid down 800 million in front of you, how high would that stack reach? How should I know? I've never even seen 100 million in my life. In the corridor just outside the chamber, half a dozen members of the Void cult exchanged glances. They'd caught every word between Damien, Lord Cassidin, and Miss Sonia, and now they couldn't help but chatter. Of course, one of them said, if you want to earn real money, you start your own business. Damien's growth has been insane, another chimed in. His mind must be razor sharp. That's exactly why Lord Cassidin is happy to fund his research, a third added. A hush fell for a moment before someone whispered, but just how sharp is his mind anyway? You need real talent if you're going to launch a business, the stranger said bluntly. No, Damien muttered, his gaze dropping. Then it sounds like you're out of options. Around them, a handful of Void cult members lingered, their voices hushed yet tinged with envy. They hadn't caught every word, but they knew enough. Lord Cassidin's housekeeper, Miss Sonia, had once again been spotted conferring with Tony Stark. The pair had arrived together today, leaving little doubt that Sonia had tracked down the inventor at her master's behest. The implication was clear. Lord Cassidin was bankrolling Stark's gravity manipulation research. And though Tony Stark himself possessed no supernatural strength, his cutting-edge technology brimmed with such raw potential that it rekindled a fighting spirit among the Void cult's ranks. If they couldn't match that level of ingenuity, they resolved they would have to push their own limits even further. Later, Sonia returned to the villa and found Damien poring over production schedules. She stepped into the study and reported, the factory's gearing up to start manufacturing. Once they go into full production, how long until we can ship the first batch? Damien tapped his pen thoughtfully against the desk. Allow 3 weeks after final mold approvals, he replied. That should give us enough time for quality checks and packaging. I'll update you as soon as they're ready to roll out. Damien sat across from Sonia in the sleek conference room, the glow of the holographic display reflecting in his eyes. With $95 million in seed capital, Sonia began, tapping the projection until it pulsed on the figure, we can acquire a small island as our manufacturing base. Damien nodded for her to continue. Once we own the site, we'll build the factory and train our operators in parallel. According to Tony Stark's specifications, the first batch of devices will be ready in 4 months. At delivery, our client pays in full. She advanced the slide. Stark's name alone will attract more orders, so we'll need additional factories. Our conservative forecast shows that, even after taxes and Mr. Stark's dividends, we'll bring in at least $3 billion annually by year's end. Damien absorbed the numbers. When do we see profit? Officially next quarter, Sonia replied, her tone matter of fact. Beyond that, we'll reinvest in R&D, expand our workforce, and secure specialized tooling. Space combat systems are high margin, but entry barriers are steep, unless you've got Tony Stark's backing. Damien allowed a small smile. Tony Stark really is a genius. It took just 5 months to complete development, though the project consumed more than 800 million credits in specialized equipment and raw materials. Bringing in a top-tier research team would have driven costs even higher. Yet Mr. Damien pulled it off. With his regular updates and iterative improvements, the gravity drive now boasts a high-performance, low-cost core. In this interstellar age, finding buyers won't be a problem for centuries. Even if, a few hundred years from now, some civilization unveils a starship that spans multiple generations, the old-era battleships won't be sidelined overnight. The universe is too vast for any single culture to sweep away every antiquated warship in one fell swoop. With that assurance secured, the second system update was dispatched. Chapter 122, Definitely Next Time. All right, Sonia said, rising from her desk. Get started on dinner, then you can rest. Damien's eyebrows shot up. Dinner? Sonia offered him a reassuring smile. Yes, begin preparations tonight, and from tomorrow onward, you'll dive straight into the new projects. Damien hesitated, still processing her words. Sonia's casual announcement that he and Tony Stark would each be pulling in at least $3 billion a year came as a shock, but if anyone could make it happen, it was Sonia. She tapped a few keys on her phone. I've alerted the kitchen. They'll start cooking. I'll fetch the food shortly. With that, she settled into the plush sofa in the hall, opened her laptop, and began her next line of inquiry. Her goal was to identify who owned the islands surrounding Void Island. Today, Tony had shown her a series of experimental samples, all of them produced in his own small lab. Scaling production to industrial capacity would require multiple factories, but Void Island itself was off-limits. It had been earmarked exclusively for the future operations of the Void Cult. Constructing a factory there simply wasn't an option. The most practical solution was to acquire a nearby island. There they could develop an industrial park, factory buildings, worker accommodations, even amenities to keep the labor force happy and motivated. A well-planned facility wouldn't just boost output, it would circulate a portion of the profits back into the local economy, ensuring the workforce stayed loyal and the venture remained solvent. As aromas from the kitchen began to drift through the hall, Sonia leaned forward, fingers dancing over her keyboard. It was time to find the perfect island, one that would become the cornerstone of their next great enterprise. From the briefing given by the new army's elite officers, Damien finally grasped the situation. Even if he never mentioned Mr. Cassidon by name, everyone important on Xandar already assumed he was Cassidon's man. Damien had never asked for that reputation. He preferred to rely on his own abilities, but he couldn't deny that Mr. Cassidon's protection was now an irrefutable fact. With that realization came confidence. He didn't need Cassidon's direct intervention to negotiate the island purchase. He could handle it himself. At the same time, as Cassidon's steward in the public eye, Damien knew he'd have to watch his every move to avoid embarrassing his patron. Tracking down an island's owner was hardly rocket science, so he quickly selected a few promising candidates. Sitting up, he tapped the floating holotable beside him, and it drifted into view. Then, he began drafting a detailed, month-long itinerary, complete with a preliminary budget to cover all expenses. Damien watched as Sonia methodically took notes and reviewed them each day. With so many details to juggle, it was all too easy to let something slip, and Sonia's habit of writing everything down ensured she never missed a beat. Seeing her so intensely focused and so capable filled Damien with quiet satisfaction. He'd been right to trust her as his housekeeper. Sonia was nothing if not thorough. After completing each task, she would reflect on her performance and immediately seek out any knowledge or skills she lacked. Whenever she discovered a shortcoming, she dove headfirst into learning, determined to do better next time. Over the course of just a year, her relentless self-improvement had streamlined Damien's life, and he realized with a twinge of guilt made him increasingly complacent. Since joining Void, Sonia was committed to serving him for many years to come. Damien made sure she was well rewarded. On top of her negotiated salary, he regularly gave her bonuses and generous gifts. It felt only fair for someone so indispensable. Still, Damien couldn't ignore the fact that he'd grown lazier in her capable hands. He thought back to when he'd first set out, how driven he'd been, how meticulously he'd planned everything himself, and wondered if he was losing the very ambition that had brought him success. Having hired Sonia as his housekeeper, Damien soon realized he hardly needed to lift a finger. Whatever needed doing, he simply asked her to handle it. The thought struck him that the next time he returned to Blue Star, he should set himself a real goal instead of drifting. He marked his calendar for 7 months later, in 2011, when, conveniently, Tony Stark would also be heading back there. By then, Blue Star was due to face its first cosmic invasion, and Damien didn't want to miss what might happen. If he stayed away, the Hulk could get sucked into the rift, forcing Bruce Banner and Tony to rush their joint technological advances. That alone was reason enough to go. Content with this plan, Damien relaxed back into his idle routine. Sonia, for her part, noticed that he cast her a brief glance before returning to his carefree gaming, seemingly unconcerned by anything else. She didn't mind his endless days of rest. Her job was simply to follow his instructions. Though her responsibilities had expanded and she was learning all sorts of new skills, she enjoyed the challenge. And with Damien's generous compensation, she had no complaints about the arrangement. Sonia's life with Mr. Cassadine had been nothing short of extraordinary. In less than a year of working for him, she'd managed to accumulate over $12 million in savings, an amount she would never have dreamed of earning in her decades spent at that celebrity hotel. Best of all, Mr. Cassadine rarely micromanaged her. He trusted her implicitly and granted her the freedom to structure her days as she saw fit. Sonia found that kind of independence infinitely more rewarding than a bigger paycheck under constant scrutiny. Of course, there was a catch. She now spent nearly every waking hour on the island. It meant her opportunities to indulge in shopping sprees or lavish nights out were virtually non-existent. And even when the latest designer dresses arrived at her door, she couldn't risk wearing them casually. After all, she still had to meet with members of the Void Cult, and she wouldn't jeopardize Mr. Cassadine's image by showing up in a rumpled or overexposed outfit. But Sonia wasn't worried. Now that she'd officially joined the Void, she knew the demands on her time would ease eventually. There would be afternoons off, trips to the mainland, and yes, plenty of chances to spend her hard-earned fortune in style. That evening, dinner was laid out in the dining pavilion overlooking the moonlit water. Sonia rose to help carry dishes to the table, her mind already wandering through the next month's to-do list. Coordinate the new donor gala, finalize the shipping schedule for the cult's literature, meet with the island's logistics team. By the time she set down the last platter, she was mentally ticking off every task she'd just written into her planner. It was 10 o'clock when she finally closed her notebook. Standing up, she stretched luxuriously, the short silk dress hugging her curves and accentuating the porcelain sheen of her skin. In the soft glow of the lanterns, her silhouette was both elegant and undeniably alluring, a powerful reminder of how far she had come and how much further she intended to go. To any other man, the sight would have been thrilling, but Damien didn't even glance up from the handheld console in his hands. Seated comfortably on the sofa, he was completely absorbed in his game. Sonia stared at him, resentment flickering in her dark eyes. She knew she was stunning. She'd breezed through every beauty screening in seconds during the Celebrity Hotel's 10-year review. Since joining the Void, her complexion had grown whiter and smoother, making her look years younger. Yet here was Damien, ignoring her completely. She cleared her throat. "Mr. Cassadine, I'll be leaving Void Island tomorrow on some business." He didn't look away from the screen. "I'll have the chef prepare your meals and deliver them right to your door." Sonia pursed her lips. "You'll still have to come downstairs and pick them up yourself." She quickly masked her irritation, replacing it with a worried smile. Before she joined the Void Cult, she'd seen this side of Damien, and she knew how damaging it would be if the many members of Void Island discovered that their admired Mr. Cassadine spent his days lounging at home. It would tarnish the dignity he'd worked so hard to maintain. It was clear that no one else could deliver the food directly. "I understand," Damien said. "I'll handle it." He glanced back at Sonia and gave a curt nod. When Sonia saw Cassadine's agreement, she realized there was no point in arguing further. With a resigned shrug, she turned and went in search of something to eat. Meanwhile, the third update was dispatched. Chapter 123, Summer Beach. Over the next month, Sonia found herself constantly on the move, greeting visitors, overseeing affairs around the island, and traveling off-island to discuss business. By the end of the first week, Damien realized how much time she was wasting shuttling back and forth and made a suggestion. "Why not buy a space fighter? You can get where you need to go far quicker." Sonia agreed. The new ship would belong to her, but whenever she wasn't using it, she could loan it to Tony for research. Originally, Damien had wanted to invest in a full-scale battleship, but Sonia persuaded him that it would be overkill and far too expensive for Tony to develop right away. A massive warship would be cumbersome for her personal trips, and Tony didn't yet have the funds or technology to tackle such a project. Instead, they decided to take a staged approach. Tony would begin by perfecting the spacefighter's design and developing a reliable production process. Once he proved its worth and started turning a profit, he'd have both the expertise and the capital to move on to larger vessels. It was a prudent, circular strategy. Start small, build success, and then scale up. With the spacefighter on order and Sonia free to travel efficiently, things were finally falling into place. Now, all they had to do was wait for Tony to work his magic and for summer to bring its own adventures to the beach. A month later, Sonia invested $370 million to acquire a 200-square-kilometer island 50 nautical miles from Void Island. She tasked me, Damien, and our team with turning it into a high-tech production hub. We erected a state-of-the-art factory, installed precision machinery, and trained a cohort of specialist technicians to manufacture the ultra-fine components used in gravity drives. Once each unit was assembled, we'd ship it to Tony Stark's laboratory on Voida. There, Jarvis would upload the proprietary software and finalize the gravity device. Our current contract calls for 800 units in exchange for $800 million, meaning we price each drive at $1 million. On the open market, a comparable gravity drive for small and medium-class warships typically retails for at least $5 million. By undercutting rivals by $4 million per unit, Tony appears to be taking a loss. In reality, however, our out-of-pocket production cost is just over $300,000 per device, and even with labor factored in, it only reaches about $420,000. As a newcomer to the arms industry, Tony's strategy is clear. Grab market share immediately by offering superior performance at a demonstrably lower price. Ever since Damien's breakthrough, the value of his inventions rose almost overnight, and with each new contract, he edged closer to his dream, owning a starfighter of his own. In just a few months, he reckoned, he'd have the credits piled high enough to place an order. With that future in sight, Damien decided it was time to unwind. It was June 2010 on Xandar, midsummer so brutal that even the fiercest warrior tribes retreated to the shore for relief. Today, Void Island's beach was crowded, almost entirely with men. Only 3 women had dared to make the pilgrimage, determined to receive the island's ancient blessing. Their courage and their choice of bright bikinis had them strikingly visible among the swaying seagrass, drawing as many appreciative glances as the shrine itself. Damien strode onto the sand, rolling his shoulders and squinting against the glare. Then, without warning, a thunderous boom echoed across the cove. He barely had time to react before a metal sphere, like a mini cannonball, hurtled straight at him. His instincts kicked in. Damien's palms flared with controlled energy as he braced himself. A split second later, the sphere slammed into his open hands with a sizzling bang, sparks flying as the metal scorched and smoked. The force of the impact shoved him backward 2 meters, leaving a gouge in the sand where he'd been standing. Damien steadied himself, eyes narrowing at the spinning orb. Whoever had sent it, or whatever purpose it served, had just made a very bad decision, and now he intended to find out why. Damien's hand throbbed from the heat of friction, but the sting faded almost as soon as it began. He turned his hand over and saw the volleyball resting there. "Hey, Damien," came a voice from the side. "Fancy a quick match?" Damien looked up to find Renoli grinning and holding out a second ball. "You're on," Damien replied with a smile, stepping onto the sand. "But let's make it friendly, no unleashing your full power." Renoli laughed. "Fair enough. Besides, who'd risk a game against Kyle if we went all out?" Damien followed Renoli's nod toward the far end of the 30-meter court. There, Kyle, a mountain of a man, hovered in midair, more than 10 meters above the sand. With a single seismic clap of his massive hands, he sent a volley careening back down. The impact echoed like distant thunder, yet the ball held together perfectly, spinning safely into the sea breeze. Damien shook his head in awe, still as unstoppable as ever. Renoli shrugged. That's Kyle for you. Damien returned his attention to Renoli, laughter in his eyes. All right, let's see what we've got. They tossed the ball between them, the sound of laughter and clapping echoing against the waves as their friendly match began. At the far end of the beach court, Kyle unleashed a serve that felt more like a falling meteor than a volleyball. His opponent, Lacey, her athletic figure strikingly outlined by a black bikini, locked her eyes onto the ball from the moment it left his hand. She darted to its landing spot in a flash, feet digging into the sand, and scooped it up cleanly. After the ball bounced, she planted both feet, sprang straight up, and crack! Sent it hurtling back over the net like a bullet. Kyle hit the sand hard, each step kicking up grains and accompanied by a low rumbling growl as if a bear were pawing its ground. He recovered instantly, scooped the ball to his chest, and slapped it right back. Shot for shot, Lacey and Kyle traded volleys with perfect control, precise enough that neither ever overpowered the other. Just then, Tony padded across the sand, a volleyball spinning lazily in his palm. He reached the opposite side of the net and came to a halt in front of Damien. Tossing the ball from one hand to the other, he called out, "Okay, Damien, what are the rules?" 1 point is deducted if you fail to catch it, 1 if it goes out of bounds, and 1 if the ball detonates. At the end, whoever has the most deductions buys the other a treat. Renali tossed the glowing sphere lightly from hand to hand as Tony's eyes lit up with interest. He settled back on a driftwood bench beneath the swaying palms and continued. Remember, the Void God cult's members possess physical prowess well beyond that of ordinary humans. Even a simple beach game becomes an all-out battle when we play. Damien stood ready on the sun-warmed sand, flexing his fingers. On Void Island, he said, sports aren't just for fun. They're proof of who can best harness their power. Win here and you earn respect and bragging rights. Lose and you'll hear about it for weeks. A small crowd had gathered along the shoreline. It was summer, after all. Sunbathers basked on colorful towels, laughter and splashes echoed across the waves, and flirtatious glances passed between friends. A few onlookers had even placed modest bets, just a handful of coins exchanged for pride's sake. Tony leaned forward. "Sounds fair," he said. "Let's see what you've got." Renali grinned, weighed the ball against his palm, and nodded to Damien. The orb pulsed with energy, ready to detonate at a moment's notice. With a sharp flick of his wrist, Renali launched it skyward, and the contest began. Determination burned in Damien's eyes as he lunged forward to catch that first crucial point. Food was the great passion of everyone in the Void God sect. No one would willingly bet so recklessly that they'd risk going hungry afterward. Yet here they were, tossing fortunes on the table as if meals were an afterthought. "Got." Damien, clutching his racket, offered an awkward grin. "This is my first time playing," he admitted. "I'm just checking how hard the ball is." Tony's eyes gleamed at the challenge. The roar of the crowd, the thrum of competition, he lived for moments like these. "All right," he said, stepping forward. "Do your best. You can even serve first." Leaning against the fence, Renoli watched them both with cool detachment. At Tony's signal, he quietly bade them begin. The ball soared into the air, thus commenced the fourth match, and the spectators erupted in anticipation once more. Chapter 124, The Power of the Void. Damien had heard that, in this tournament, he could challenge anyone he pleased, and he also knew how unwise it would be to pick Renoli as his first opponent. All the other fighters were spent, their energy sapped by back-to-back battles, but Renoli still looked fresh as a rose, and had already claimed more victories than anyone else. A match against him would be a guaranteed loss. But Damien didn't care about the odds. To him, this was just dinner money, and, more importantly, a chance for fun. He'd been on Xandar for 6 months now, pushing his body and his powers so hard that he'd averaged 2 evolutions a week. By now, he'd unlocked 124 forms of himself. Yet in all that time, he'd never truly tested his mettle against a worthy adversary. When he first arrived on Xandar, he was broke and desperate, pouring every waking hour into research rather than sparring. Now that his finances were finally stable, he'd grown complacent, rarely venturing out of his lab. Hearing about this competition felt like fate. He had to know just how strong he'd become. So when the announcer called his name, Damien stepped onto the arena floor, void energy crackling faintly around his fingertips. He dribbled casually at the three-point line, gauging the distance, gauging Renoli's gaze. Then, with a grin, he bent his knees, coiled like a spring, and launched himself skyward. Focusing every ounce of his void power into the shot, he released the ball. It streaked through the air, a whisper of darkness against bright stadium lights, and swished clean through the net. 3 points. The arena erupted. Damien landed lightly, his smile widening. Now the real test could begin. With a thunderous smack, the volleyball rocketed over the net and slammed into Renoli's chest. In a blur, Renoli dove, secured the ball, and sprang up to deliver a crushing spike. The ball tore down through the air like a speeding freight train, drenching the court, and Damien, who had been standing in the back center, barely managed to get his arms up in time. The impact slammed him backward 3 meters, sending him skidding across the wet floor. Fortunately, Renoli had struck the ball from too far inside the court. Had the spike been even slightly wider, Damien would have been forced out of bounds, and the point would have been theirs. Panting, he glanced to his left where Lacey and Kyle were locked in an intense rally, trading blows as if it were routine. They were unfazed by the chaos behind them. Coach's voice crackled over the whistle. Damien, you can swing all you want, but here's the secret. Transition from receive to serve as quickly as possible. Your serve has to be explosive, and every shot must carry maximum power. Most importantly, you must learn to control that power with pinpoint accuracy. That control is what wins matches. Damien inhaled deeply, wiped the sweat and spray from his eyes, and squared his shoulders. Match point or not, he was ready to put that advice into practice. Brute strength alone won't win you the match, Damien muttered, rubbing his sore forearms. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, and paid for it more than once. Tony glanced at him with a half-smile, tapping the side of his wrist as if checking a hidden device. Renoli noticed the exchange and spoke up before Tony could reply. So, are we allowed to use any tools? Tony paused, weighing his words. I'd love to let you rig up whatever you want. Testing your inventions against me would be a blast. But this is an exhibition match. It's supposed to be fair play. Bringing gadgets or special enhancements would just spoil the point. We'll have plenty of chances to gear up later. Today, it's all about raw skill. Damien shook his head, but a challenger's spark lit his eyes. He remembered how formidable Tony's steel armor had been last time, and he was eager for a rematch. A pure one-on-one fight would show him exactly where he stood against high-tech defenses. If only the rules would bend. For now, he'd have to wait. Tony nodded thoughtfully, then tossed the volleyball again, gradually increasing his strength. By the time he reached about 45% of his power, the ball fractured and exploded on impact. You can't use your powers off the court, he reminded himself, so it's safe to channel a bit of my own energy. With the concept down, Tony caught Renoli's next serve and called out, Renoli, I remember you're not a superhuman. What abilities do you have besides that armor? Why don't you show me? Renoli's eyes lit up with curiosity. All right, let's give it a try. Tony gripped the volleyball in his right hand and summoned a halo of violet void energy. He'd seen Damien's spatial teleportation in action. Damien had explained it was a form of void magic, and though Tony was no expert, his recent evolutions had unlocked a reserve of void power within him. Focusing that energy, he blessed the ball. Instantly, it glowed with rippling purple flames, an orb of flickering void light that drew gasps from the sideline crowd. Where does your strength come from? Renoli's eyes flickered as he watched the volleyball in Damien's hands begin to shift, its surface rippling and darkening. It's an evolution born of the void, Damien replied casually, as if discussing the weather. Renoli frowned. You just tapped void energy? Surely that doesn't violate any rules? Not at all, Damien said with a grin. Honestly, it's far more interesting this way. Leaning forward, Renaud, another of their teammates, examined the ball. Its density has increased. It can withstand far greater impact now. Renaud's excitement was contagious. The Void Divine cult, he knew, prided itself on strengthening the body and heightening the senses. Many of its initiates had glimpsed godlike visions and unleashed terrifying abilities, but none had truly mastered their power. Damien's demonstration was different. He'd altered the very energy signature of the ball. That meant the void's power could evolve, and perhaps be harnessed in ways no one had anticipated. If this is the beginning, Renaud said, his voice full of wonder, then there are whole new evolutionary paths waiting to be discovered, and without understanding them, you can't even begin to talk about true advancement. Exactly, Damien agreed, tossing the ball into the air. As it hovered, its surface quivered with latent energy. Ready to see how far this can go? With a collective breath held, they watched the volleyball descend and braced themselves for whatever came next. Tony launched himself skyward like an eagle, the purple aura swirling around the volleyball, flaring into a brilliant, blinding light. With a thunderous crack, he drove the ball forward with every ounce of his strength. The enchanted sphere held firm against his power and hurtled toward Renoli like a violet magic star streaking through the heavens, its trailing luminescent tail promising utter devastation on impact. Renoli's confidence wavered for only a moment before he unleashed his speed blessing. Dozens of afterimages flickered across the 15-meter court as he tapped into his hidden reserves, bracing himself to meet Tony's onslaught head-on. When the charged ball struck Renoli's outstretched hands, an earth-shaking bang erupted beneath him. The force shattered the court's surface, gouging a crater at his feet and testing the strength of his grip. A guttural roar escaped Renoli's lips as he fought to steady himself. Summoning every last bit of power, he hoisted the exploding sphere aloft. Before him yawned a chasm 10 meters wide and well over a meter deep, the violent testament to their clash of magic and might. Damien watched in stunned silence as Tony launched his orb into the air, an orb that crackled ominously with void energy. The people gathered around them gaped, unable to believe what they were seeing. Void energy was supposed to be legend, a force no one could control. Yet here it was, manifesting in Tony's attack with terrifying clarity. When the orb slammed into the ground, a shockwave pulled outward, tearing up the earth and sending dust spiraling into the sky. In that moment, every onlooker felt it. Whoever mastered the void would possess unrivaled power. Chapter 5 is now live. If you enjoyed the update, please leave a recommendation and cast your vote. Chapter 125, The Path Revealed. Damien smashed the volleyball and, in a flash of motion, sprang up to return it with a fierce slap. The crack sounded like distant thunder across the beach, drawing startled glances from everyone nearby. Even imbued with void energy, the ball didn't burst under the force of Damien and Tony's combined power. Tony's eyes burned with determination. He dropped into a low squat, braced his feet in the shifting sand, and met Damien's blow squarely. The impact rattled him from head to toe, sending a spray of sand flying in all directions. Damien's strength lay primarily in his speed, so although that full-powered hit cost Tony dearly, his arms trembled and his palms burned, he held on. Tony wasted no time. He answered with his own thunderous strike, and suddenly it was a clash of titans. Each return shook the ground beneath them, the volleyball enduring 5 brutal volleys from both sides. Finally, with the crowd leaning in, Damien prepared for his decisive serve. The volleyball couldn't take the strain and burst apart in midair with a thunderous crack. Renoli staggered back, eyes shining. That was incredible. Damien, how long have you been able to channel void energy like that? Damien knelt to gather the shred pieces of the ball, a satisfied grin on his face. About 6 months. At first, I barely had any void power to work with, so I only used it sparingly. It wasn't until I went through several evolutions that my reserves grew strong enough to really push the limits. He held up a jagged strip of plastic and shrugged. I honestly had no idea what would happen when I infused an object with void energy. I just thought, why not experiment? I wasn't even sure I could strengthen the volleyball. Clearly, I succeeded, though maybe a bit too dramatically. Renoli laughed as he inspected the remnants on the ground. Mission accomplished, then. The explosion was definitely spectacular. Damien's eyes gleamed with excitement. If I can bind void energy to a volleyball, there's no reason I can't apply the same technique to my steel armor. Imagine what void-infused plating could do, boosting both its strength and durability far beyond anything we've seen. He tapped a stray fragment thoughtfully. Of course, I still need to determine if there are any side effects or time limits to this enhancement. But today's breakthrough opens an entirely new path for my technology. With void-infused armor, I might be able to face threats I never even dreamed of before. How much of your void energy did you use to reinforce that last serve? Renoli asked, his tone thoughtful. He'd been watching Damien closely ever since the boy had summoned that strange power. About 20%, Damien replied, glancing at the faint residue of void energy still lingering around his fists. I just let it loose the moment I decided to, didn't hold back on purpose. Renoli leaned in, curiosity flickering in his eyes. So you can calibrate it at will. That means you can boost the ball's force, but only for a single strike? Damien gave a short nod. Exactly. It's enough for one explosive hit, then it's gone. Interesting. Renoli tapped a finger against his chin. You'll have to refine your control. If you can sustain it for more than one shot, you'll be unstoppable. Damien cracked a small smile. That's the plan. I'll keep practicing. Renoli's gaze sharpened, assessing Damien in silent approval. The match resumed, and now both players knew they were up against more than just skill and reflexes. They were up against something altogether different. Tony's command of void energy was still crude and unrefined, a natural consequence of a power so new to him. But that unfamiliarity wasn't what mattered most. The real difference lay between those who wield extraordinary abilities and those who do not. With practice, even the most alien power can become second nature. Without it, you'll never have the chance to learn at all. I only discovered this ability today, Tony admitted, eyes alight with excitement. But I want to merge it with my technology. He paused, considering. Imagine the innovations we could unlock. Call it void tech, if you will. Renoli cocked her head. Void technology? That's ambitious. But why focus on evolving void power? Most of us in the cult simply enhance our bodies, greater strength, endurance, agility. It's practical, especially when facing real threats, and while evolution of any kind can, in theory, continue endlessly, each successive leap becomes harder and harder. Tony smiled at her skepticism. Precisely. Physical upgrades are straightforward, but they have limits. Void energy, well, that's a frontier. If we can harness it, shape it, we could open doors no amount of muscle or steel ever could. Renoli folded her arms. So you'd rather experiment with something untested than stick with what works? That's the nature of progress, Tony said simply. We don't stay safe by standing still. As the two of them debated, the rest of the Void cult kept to their training grounds, pushing their bodies to the brink. In the end, whether their future lay in raw physical might or in this strange new Void tech, they all shared the same goal, survival and supremacy in a world that would neither wait nor yield to the unprepared. That's why, from the very beginning, we all need to be upfront about how many evolutions we've undergone, and in which direction, Damien said. In contrast, Tony ended up focusing entirely on void power, neglecting physical upgrades altogether, even though he barely understands the ability himself. He shrugged. Honestly, I'm just experimenting. I want to try everything. Tony let out a soft laugh. He wasn't about to admit that Damien's astonishing display had piqued his curiosity. He didn't want people thinking he was riding Damien's coattails for attention. Experimenting, huh? Well, it makes sense. You've never made your fortune by throwing punches. Your inventions are what bring in the real money. Exactly. So boosting my body isn't high on my list. Renoli nodded. Many members of the Void cult do favor physical enhancements, mostly because of Kyle. When she first joined and saw that hulking brute tear through boulders like they were paper, she'd instinctively gravitated toward him. Lacey, on the other hand, had faced plenty of bounty hunters and knew that most second-tier operatives don't rely solely on raw strength. Lacey had always insisted on striking the perfect balance between strength and speed in her evolution. Ruthless and single-minded, she advanced at a breakneck pace, and her current power was nothing short of impressive. Yet all eyes were on Damien now. Although he still struggled to master his newfound void abilities, everyone recognized the boundless potential those powers represented. It was almost certainly one of the fundamental pillars of void evolution. After all, they'd witnessed the void's gods, beings of such unimaginable scale that whole galaxies seemed to spin around them, capable of swallowing planets like pebbles. Facing such a colossus, no ordinary attack could hope to leave a scratch. And if these titans ever learned to wield the void's energy fully, their strength would be truly unfathomable. The sphere just exploded, Damien admitted with a rueful shrug. Guess I lost this round. Renoli laughed and clapped him on the shoulder. Come on, I'm buying dinner. You're not out of the game yet, Renoli teased, glancing at the scoreboard. It's only a 1-point difference. Damien let out a rueful laugh. He desperately wanted to best Renoli, but an early misstep had cost him that critical point. Fair enough, he replied. Still, I'm grateful. You gave me a masterclass tonight. Renoli's eyes brightened. More than a masterclass. I'd say you've shown us a whole new direction to explore. Damien raised an eyebrow. Is that your way of saying I deserve a reward? With a playful grin, Renoli nodded. A feast on me. You've earned it. At that, Damien's tension melted away. He returned the grin, the fierce rivalry of moments ago giving way to genuine camaraderie. Author's note, day 10,000, and the first update is finally here. Chapter 126 is currently under review and will be released tomorrow. I promise I didn't skip anything. Spread the word. Chapter 126, Constraints Imposed by Identity. Kyle, Lacey, and the Predictor arrived just as Damien was finishing his session with Tony. Eager for more practice, they joined Tony and headed toward the restaurant together. On the way, Tony asked casually, Lacey, Kyle, who won your match back there? Lacey grinned. It was 2-2, so pretty even. But Kyle got distracted on the final rally, and I took the point. She turned to Kyle triumphantly. That makes my record against him 6 wins to 5 losses. Kyle's eyes widened in mock dismay. You've beaten me 6 times now? Lacey laughed. And not just in volleyball. We've faced off in other sports, too. Tony looked at Kyle in surprise. You lose that often? Kyle ran a hand through his hair. Yeah, in many competitive events, there's a cap on how much strength I can use. Some rule or limiter always kicks in. It keeps me from going all out. I definitely had a shot at winning today, but your void power threw me off. Once I'm forced to curb my raw strength and rely on finesse, I fall apart. Tony raised an eyebrow at Kyle's candid confession. Kyle gave a small, self-deprecating shrug. When it's an unrestricted test of speed and power, he knows he can win. But the moment the rules emphasize control and technique over brute force, he's at a disadvantage. Remember, the purpose of these contests isn't simply to rack up wins or losses, the prophet reminded Damien, her gaze sharp. It's about refining your control over your strength. Our power grows almost by the day. Lose your grip, and you risk disaster. Damien nodded, absorbing her warning. Before he could respond, Lacey turned to Tony, offering him a gentle but firm smile. Tony, you've got an incredibly sturdy physique, probably over 100 evolutions at this point, yet your power control is lacking. Research is important, but I'd recommend you join more of the faith's organized trials, and don't forget to train regularly in the gravity chamber. Tony scratched the back of his head with an embarrassed grin. You're right, Lacey. I actually visited the gravity room today, but I'll make it a point to train there more often. After all, that's where I first developed the gravity calibrator. Lacey chuckled. Good. Consistency is key. The day will come when you can tailor your strength as precisely as you adjust your devices. I'm not just going to show you the gravity chamber from the control room, Lacey said, her voice even but firm. I want you to step inside and feel exactly what it does. Damien hesitated at the heavy door. He'd heard about Renoli's training here, how he'd learned to sprint flat out for 15 meters and then brake with surgical precision. Such mastery wasn't born of talent alone. That kind of control, Lacey continued, is the result of relentless practice. She motioned toward the chamber's reinforced entrance. As members of the Void God religion, we won't be fighting ordinary opponents. The world outside, and the battles we'll face, will throw every kind of threat at us, from deadly foes to environments that defy common sense. In training now, she said, you'll adapt before you ever encounter those conditions in the field. Lacey glanced back at the chamber. On top of all our competitive drills, we spend hours in here. I can handle 20 times Earth's gravity while fully loaded with gear. She shook her head with a wry smile. Precognitives, our predictors, tops out around 10 Gs. That's why they bring every piece of kit they'll ever use, weapons, sensors, comm units. To an uninitiated precog, just stepping in here would feel like torture. Damien squared his shoulders, swallowed hard, and stepped forward. The heavy door slid open with a hiss of air. If he wanted to keep up with Lacey and live to see tomorrow, there was no turning back. Damien had risen to a rank 2 bounty hunter thanks to his precognitive gift and a broad set of combat skills. In recent months, precogs across the board had seen their physical abilities surge, so much so that only they themselves truly understood their own limits. Take Kyle, for example. He could endure 40 times Earth's gravity while carrying full combat gear through grueling drills. Renali trained differently, ratcheting up the G-forces one notch at a time while relying on his foresight. After just 6 months in the field, Renali was already breaking the sound barrier at Mach 1 under 5 Gs of acceleration. Most of the other Void cult members had followed suit, each honing a unique blend of strength and skill to stay ahead. "I see," Tony said thoughtfully. "Looks like I'll have to find time for some extra training myself." No sooner had he spoken than Damien triggered his speed ability. He vanished in a blink, leaving dozens of shimmering afterimages in his wake, a spectacular sight that barely hinted at the terrifying precision driving it. And while catching up to Damien was a feat in itself, every other member of the Void cult was making rapid strides as well. The gap was closing faster than anyone realized. Damien knew full well that if he buried himself in research and ignored the influence of the elders, he might be discarded the moment he outlived his usefulness. A few of the Void cult's members were already making their way to the beachside restaurant, voices raised in laughter as they bantered among themselves. Inside his villa, Damien slipped out onto the balcony, lost in thought as he gazed toward the moonlit shoreline. Moments later, Sonia joined him, pausing a respectful distance away. "Mr. Cassidy," she ventured, "the others are gathering for the competition on the beach. Will you be joining them?" He sighed, loosening the tension in his shoulders. "I wish I could," he admitted, "but it's just not possible." Sonia cocked her head, puzzled. "Why not? Your presence would honor everyone." Damien smiled wryly. "Because I've come to represent the very image this cult projects to the world. If I show up and win, no one would bat an eye. But if I lose, they'd question my right to lead. Better to watch from afar." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Understood. I'll tell them you'll observe from here." "Thank you," he said quietly, raising the glass of wine resting on the railing. As Sonia slipped back inside, Damien returned his gaze to the waves, knowing he'd chosen caution over sport, and preserved his reputation for another night. Cassidy didn't bother to hide her thoughts. She stood on the balcony, eyes fixed on the beach far below, where the day's competition was already drawing a lively crowd. "As Mr. Cassidy's housekeeper, it's my responsibility to keep an eye on everything happening on the island," she explained. "You know how spirited these contests get. Every Void cult member comes out to watch, even if they don't actually compete. I'd love to join in, but my position confines me to the sidelines." Damien heard her sigh and hesitated for a moment before speaking. "You don't need to hold back just because you're my butler," he said gently. "There's no rule that says you can't compete." He chose his words carefully. As a devoted follower of the Void God, Damien always maintained a measure of restraint, especially when he was hiding behind Cassidy's identity. On Blue Star, he could freely embrace his role as Damien, but here he had to balance strength with the solemn respect his faith demanded. Damien gave a small, grateful bow. "Sir, I can't tell you how relieved I am that you've agreed to let me go." Mr. Cassidy offered nothing more than a curt nod. "But I doubt the others in the Void cult will be so understanding," Damien continued, his tone growing serious. "From their perspective, I'm your formidable butler, someone who must possess all manner of arcane knowledge about the Void. The truth is, I know very little. If they start quizzing me, I won't be able to answer." Cassidy's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Just keep your wits about you," he said softly, then turned and walked away without another word. Chapter 127. Private Meeting. "All right, Sonia. If you're going to buy that uninhabited island, make sure it's a big one," Damien said, leaning back in his chair. Sonia had just floated the idea, and Damien took a moment before answering. He didn't expect her to become some unstoppable force, and he certainly wasn't worried she'd upstage him, but he admired how seriously she took her own boundaries. She always defined exactly what she could and couldn't do. Still, the notion of owning an entire island carried risks. Rumors would spread, and anyone curious about her void abilities might probe her, and if her answers fell short, her credibility could suffer. "You've still got 2 billion in reserves," he added. Sonia cocked her head. "Buying another island isn't the problem, but why should I?" Damien let a faint smile play on his lips. "Because I've already handled Mr. Tony's business." Sonia's brow furrowed. "You handled Tony's affairs?" She sounded genuinely puzzled. Damien nodded. "Everything's settled. You don't need to worry about him anymore." Sonia stared at him, uncertainty in her eyes. For the first time since their partnership began, she hesitated, caught between relief and the lingering question of just how much Damien was capable of. "There are too many people on that island to build a proper sports arena," Mr. Cassadin announced, settling into his chair. "So I went ahead and bought the best one on the market instead." Damien looked up, puzzled. "And the Void Divine Faith you founded, was that just to make trouble?" "Not at all," Cassadin replied with a faint smile. "I created it so we'd have our own playground. Since we can't easily join the established circles, we'll carve out our own. And if you find yourself boxed in on the island, well, there's always the chance to get off-world." Damien's pulse quickened. "You mean I'll be coming with you?" At that, Sonia, who'd been standing quietly at the window, turned sharply. She'd initially thought Cassadin's plan to acquire a massive starship was overkill. Mr. Tony's lab had neither the expertise nor the facilities to study such a vessel. Any warship they bought would have gathered dust as little more than a showpiece. But this time was different. Cassadin intended to fly the ship himself, and with the island secured as their outpost, developing it into a profitable hub would be simple, even if they never set foot on it again. "He wants you on board, Damien. Say yes," Sonia urged gently. Damien met her gaze and nodded. "All right, I'm in." Sonia's face lit up. With Mr. Tony's factory now under their control and a brand new starship on its way, every piece of Cassadin's daring plan was finally falling into place. After the shipment cleared customs and Tony took his cut, Damien's share still exceeded 300 million yuan. From then on, he could count on hundreds of millions in annual income and finally breathe easy about money. No sooner was the deal done than Sonia climbed into her fighter jet and roared off. Thanks to Damien's earlier reconnaissance of the nearby archipelago, he already knew who owned each island, so arranging introductions and negotiations proved surprisingly straightforward. Damien looked forward to a few days of leisure, time to relax without a care for beachside troubles or looming deadlines. Meanwhile, Tony's public demonstration of void powers had stirred interest within the void cult. Spreading word of that display would only strengthen the group's reputation among its members. 5 days later, Sonia closed on a 506-square-kilometer uninhabited island for a bargain price of 530 million yuan. More than 400 nautical miles from Falling Star Harbor, it lay far off normal shipping routes. Its isolation made it perfect, private, secure, and well beyond the reach of unwanted visitors. As soon as the deed went through, Damien loaded up the cargo plane with the furnishings and equipment Sonia had ordered and headed straight for their new island retreat, determined to transform it into the ideal venue for the cult's next gathering. Damien Cassadin's yacht sliced through the turquoise waters as they neared the private island. Once ashore, Sonia slipped into a pristine white one-piece. The sun caught her fair skin, lending it a soft glow that highlighted her delicate features and poised silhouette. She stepped onto the deck, hands on her hips, and offered him a playful smile. "Mr. Cassadin, how do I look?" Damien turned, his eyes warm. He let a slow smile unfurl. "It suits you perfectly." Her smile widened, and she moved to spread out towels and arrange beach chairs. Damien found himself strangely captivated. There was something in the way she carried herself, the way she met his gaze. A flicker of desire rose in his chest, but he stifled it at once. Sonia was his housekeeper, hired to keep every detail of his life running smoothly. Their relationship was strictly professional, and he was determined to keep it that way. As long as he never asked her to spend the night aboard, there'd be no room for misunderstanding or resentment. If he overstepped, he'd either have to pay dearly to dissolve their arrangement, or risk raising suspicion on Xandar, jeopardizing his plans to return to Blue Star without complications. Better to maintain clear boundaries, he reminded himself, and let Sonia do her work undisturbed. Damien had come to a simple conclusion. He was willing to give up almost anything, but not his heart. After all, there were already countless beauties on Blue Star, and a universe full of worlds beyond. If he ever wanted to satisfy idle impulses, he had all the options he could ask for. There was no need to blur the line between himself and Sonia. "It's all set, Mr. Cassadin," came the quiet report from his attendant. Sonia sensed Damien's gaze on her, but rather than shrinking back, she felt a thrill of pleasure. She lifted her hand and waved cheerfully at him as he lounged in the shade of a nearby tree. At the cue, Damien rose, slipped out of his shining armor, and stepped into a form-fitting swim brief that emphasized every inch of his tall, muscular frame. The sunlight glinted off his broad shoulders and defined chest, and for a moment, Sonia's breath caught in her throat. Then she looked up at his face, and the spell was broken. His features were hidden behind that ever-present golden visor, leaving her unable to read a single expression. In its blank radiance, any spark of attraction in her chest quietly fizzled out. She found herself thinking, not for the first time, that she would have preferred a more handsome face beneath the visor. Without that invisible draw, her heart calmed, and her competitive spirit took over. They spent the afternoon on that deserted island, racing through hidden coves, shooting arrows at makeshift targets, sprinting barefoot along the sun-warmed sand. Each challenge was a friendly duel, a way to test strength and skill, and to remind themselves that sometimes boundaries are better left clearly drawn. Damien stared at the shattered remains of the orb at his feet and sighed. Between the two of them, there could only be a winner and a loser, and so far, he'd only managed to blow up every single practice sphere he touched. It wasn't for lack of effort. He'd thrown everything he had into perfecting his void energy control, but it turned out to be far more difficult than he'd imagined. One miscalibration, one moment of overfocus, and the orb would, boom, explode. Sonia, by contrast, made it look effortless. Her void attunement was gentler, more practiced. She rarely overpowered a play, and she certainly never obliterated her orb. As twilight settled over Void Island, Damien offered to walk her back to the villa. There, after a simple dinner of seaweed soup and steamed fish, they set up a fresh orb and resumed their duel. Free from the stifling expectations of the other Void Cult acolytes, Sonia relaxed completely. She no longer feared offending Mr. Cassadin's dignity in front of the temple's inner circle. Damien, on the other hand, treated each serve like a final exam, experimenting with every surge of void-stored energy he could muster. They played uninterrupted from dawn, casting long shadows to the afternoon light filtering through the villa's open windows. Then Sonia's communicator buzzed at her hip. She flipped it open, eyebrows knitting together. "Mr. Cassadin," she announced, reading the message. "New visitors are inbound to the island. They'll reach the temple shortly." Damien paused, orb suspended mid-serve. Sonia slipped the device back into her pocket. "I'm sorry to cut our match short," she said with a small, regretful smile. "But I should go welcome them." She gathered her gear, and together they left the villa's courtyard, the afternoon sun marking the next turn in their endless game, and the arrival of guests who might change everything. Chapter 3. Sonia flushed with embarrassment, lowering her gaze. It was rare for Mr. Cassadin to invite her to join him, and only the two of them knew about this little secret rendezvous. The mere thought of it set her heart racing, but living free on this island didn't mean she had no obligations at all. "It's all right," she murmured. "We can always play next time." Damien stopped in his tracks. "Next time?" His voice held a teasing note, but underneath it was genuine hope. Sonia's eyes widened in surprise. Then she smiled brightly. "Of course, this island exists so we can relax, just the two of us. There will definitely be a next time." He nodded, pleased. "Good." Her excitement bubbled over. "Come on, then, let's head back and change into something more comfortable." Grinning, Damien let her tug him by the hand. In the next instant, they were striding toward the villa on Void Island, eager for whatever adventures lay ahead. Chapter 128, October. Sonia slipped into the shower as soon as she woke, changed into fresh clothes, and hurried off to the temple. Meanwhile, Damien's routine on Xandar had settled into a comfortable rhythm. eating, drinking, playing, and one new hobby. Whenever Sonia's schedule freed up, the two of them escaped to a private, uninhabited island to spar and test their skills against one another. Time moved swiftly, and over 3 months had already passed. It was now October. Tony's custom gravity device was completed on schedule, delivered without a hitch, and its client paid the final balance immediately. After taxes, they were left with 720 million credits. Tony set aside 120 million for his own projects, planning to acquire and experiment on various spacefighter models and to cover everyday expenses. The remaining 240 million credits he promptly returned to Damien as reimbursement. After all, Tony had been living under Damien's roof and enjoying his hospitality ever since arriving in the galaxy 10 months ago, and with only 2 months left before his return home, he was determined to square up all his debts. In just 10 months, Damien has absorbed more knowledge than most people learn in a lifetime. He's delved deeply into nanotechnology, so much so that the theoretical groundwork for nano armor is already laid out in his notebooks. He just hasn't managed to integrate it into a working suit yet, but he isn't worried. It's only a matter of time before he cracks that problem. During this period, he's made 4 especially important breakthroughs. The first came in the form of friendships. By working alongside the members of the Void cult, he's earned the trust of Renoli, the enigmatic predictor, Kyle, and Lacey. He knows that if trouble ever finds him, he only needs to call on them, and they'll come. The second came through his experiments with void energy itself. Damien confirmed what the cultists have long whispered. The power of the void can indeed bless ordinary materials, granting them extraordinary properties. But there's a catch. The moment a material is suffused with void essence, its structural integrity begins to decay. An object might perform brilliantly for 10 whole minutes, but after that, it disintegrates into dust. Even if he doesn't use it, a void-infused item will shatter on its own within about 10 days. Whether this flaw springs from inherent weaknesses in the base materials or from some quirk of the void remains a puzzle Damien has yet to solve. Still, there are upsides. By channeling void energy into his standard steel armor, Damien can temporarily boost its performance, giving him precious extra seconds in combat. Between that, his growing network of allies, and the promise of future nano armor, he's never felt more prepared for whatever challenges lie ahead. Damien had dubbed his new upgrade Void Mode. Thanks to the 45th generation improvements to his steel armor, he was already overqualified to tackle most foes. In practice, that meant he seldom needed to use the steel plates in Void Mode, saving him a small fortune in maintenance and repair. Beyond raw combat power, he was making steady progress toward his larger goals. Within a year or two, he'd have the credits to ship back vast quantities of materials and rare elements to Blue Star, filling the shortages his home planet desperately faced. And after specialized training under Renoli and the others, he'd gained remarkably precise control over his own strength. Even stripped of armor, Damien's fighting effectiveness remained nothing short of fearsome. All in all, his plan was unfolding exactly as he'd intended before venturing into the outer reaches of space. Yet every time he thought about stepping foot back on Blue Star, a twinge of frustration crept in. The idea of tightening his belt and hauling around bulky steel armor just to look impressive felt limiting. If only he could master Void Mode as fluidly as Renoli, altering his appearance at will and moving freely, it would make everything infinitely easier. Tony had actually asked Damien to teach him how to control void power, but Damien just shook his head. "My own command of the void is laughable," he admitted. "I wouldn't know where to begin teaching you." Despite the rejection, Tony felt a small spark of relief. At least, by keeping his true identity hidden for a while longer, he'd bought himself some breathing room. That morning, his comm unit buzzed. "Mr. Tony, a new purchase order has just come in." He glanced at the screen. "Total value? 2.4 billion credits, with a 1.2 billion down payment already processed." Sonia's voice crackled over the line. "I heard you'll be returning to Blue Star in 2 months. If you're not here, who's going to finish the final installation steps?" Tony tapped his chin. He delivered the prototype gravity generators a month ago. Ever since, his clients had run every conceivable test on the device, and the feedback had been glowing. Their report concluded, a single, medium-sized warship can now host multiple, customizable gravity fields in different compartments. The system automatically recalibrates gravity levels based on external conditions. Most impressive of all, it can project a localized gravitational well outside the ship's hull, granting unprecedented precision in acceleration and deceleration maneuvers. In short, Sonia continued, your gravity drive is a marvel. Everyone's clamoring for more. She paused. But if you're off-world for the final calibration, we'll need someone else to step in. Tony forced a smile. Don't worry, I'll make sure the team here knows exactly what to do. And if anything goes sideways, I'll shuttle back for the last adjustments myself. Sonia laughed. Good, because with a contract this big, we can't afford any slip-ups. She signed off, leaving Tony staring out at the sprawling hangar below, already plotting his next move. Damien studied the blueprint spread across the table, then looked up at Sonia. A gravity device of this caliber normally costs 8 to 10 million credits, he said. And that's before you even think about greasing the right palms at the factory if they're willing to sell you one at all. Sonia nodded. Exactly. But Tony's design? It's fully operational, surprisingly affordable, and he's as down-to-earth in business as he is in the lab. His lead times are short, the workmanship is flawless, and he stands behind every prototype. Our previous suppliers, no matter how much we paid, dragged out deadlines, shipped us faulty parts, and threatened to blacklist us if we complained. Damien's brow furrowed. Sounds almost too good to be true. I don't think it is, Sonia replied, tapping her stylus against her tablet. That's why I'm building a bespoke AI to handle all post-production quality control. It'll streamline everything. At that, Tony looked up from his station and exchanged a glance with Sonia. He'd made up his mind. When he returned to Blue Star, Jarvis would be coming with him. There was no question of leaving the AI behind. Clearing his throat, Damien turned back to Sonia. So, when do you leave? Sonia checked her schedule on the tablet. I've already penciled in the departure date. Silence fell for a moment as the three of them absorbed the plan. An unbeatable gravity device, a custom AI to keep it flawless, and a timeline that finally made sense. It was a far cry from the headaches they'd endured before, and it felt like the fresh start they all needed. If it's going to take months, I'll put together an itemized list for you to review, Sonia said. Once you've checked the figures, I'll transfer the funds immediately, Tony replied. Sonia met his gaze. I can't say for certain how long, probably several months at least. Tony waved a hand dismissively. You're Cassidon's valet, Sonia. I trust you completely. You don't need to sweat every detail. With all due respect, Mr. Stark, this is business, Sonia countered, her tone firm. We're talking significant sums. It's only prudent to have a transparent breakdown. She shook her head and nodded firmly. Very well. Send me the list, and I'll settle the account once I've verified everything. Tony grinned at her determination, then turned to Damien, who remained expressionless. Do you have any idea when Cassidon might return to our universe? Damien paused thoughtfully. That depends on Pepper. After everything she's been through, she won't let him go for at least a year. Tony nodded in acknowledgement. He glanced back at Damien. When Cassidon does arrive, will you accompany him to Blue Star? Damien inclined his head. Though no one in the Void Cult truly knew where Cassidon came from, Tony chose to frame it as a journey forward rather than a homecoming, and now all that remained was to wait. Damien wouldn't make such a careless mistake in a conversation. Well then, I suppose I'll head over there and have some fun, he said, nodding in agreement. It was 2011, the year Captain America was brought back to life, and the first gathering of the Avengers was fast approaching. What if he never made it back? Sonia, standing quietly by, had overheard that Mr. Cassidon was bound for Blue Star and would be away for some time. Though a pang of regret tugged at her heart, she kept silent. Chapter 129, Changes in Strength. Sonia sat quietly, piecing together what she already suspected. Mr. Tony and Mr. Cassidine weren't merely acquaintances or casual allies. They were confidants, the only two people, besides herself, who truly understood Cassidine's secret nature. Yet Tony had been impeccable in his discretion. No hint of scandal had ever surfaced on the island. Tony leaned back in his chair, a mischievous glint in his eye. So, Damien, are you planning to bring Miss Sonia with you when you leave? Sonia's heart skipped a beat. She glanced nervously at Cassadine. Tony, please, don't joke about that. Damien shot Tony an exasperated look. Come on, Tony, don't tease her. I'm not teasing, Tony replied smoothly. He turned to Sonia. Think about it. After all this time, she's been the only one looking after you. Once you go back, you'll have no one to attend to your every need. Aren't you attached by now? Sonia opened her mouth to protest, but Damien was quicker. I've only just arrived, he said. Sonia was simply the first capable secretary available. Tony waved his hand as though brushing away an argument. Maybe so, but without Pepper's guidance, I never would have settled in here. Sonia's done the same for you. You owe her more gratitude than you realize. Cassadine watched the exchange with a faint smile. Sonia's cheeks flushed, caught between gratitude and embarrassment, while Damien's expression softened. No matter how tough or self-reliant he appeared, he'd grown to rely on Sonia's calm efficiency, and perhaps just a little on her friendship too. I know you need someone to look after you every day, Tony said, folding his arms across his chest, but must you always be so stubborn about it? Damien sighed, feeling the helpless twist in his chest as he met Tony's confident stare. He honestly couldn't manage on his own, but pride kept him from admitting it. I'm just stating the facts, he said. I'll say what needs to be said. Tony rolled his eyes. Sonia should come with you. She needs to see the island anyway. Damien shook his head. She's got too many responsibilities there right now. She can't just drop everything to play caretaker. Tony leaned back, unconcerned. And besides, you've never had anyone waiting on you constantly. You wouldn't know how to handle it. You'd just get used to lazing around, would you? Damien glanced at Sonia, standing silently nearby, then looked back at Tony. Her absence will be a real problem out there. Tony shrugged, spreading his hands in defeat. As much as he'd tried to push Damien into accepting Sonia's help, he knew better than to argue further. He dated plenty of women. He could see when someone had feelings. Sonia's tender glances and patient attentions weren't lost on him. If Damien simply nodded, she would throw herself at him without hesitation. Yet, Damien inexplicably held back, unwilling to cross that invisible line. If Damien claimed he was just too shy or afraid of jeopardizing their relationship, Tony wouldn't believe it for a second. Damien wasn't timid. Any chance he got, he'd sneak out for a quick meal, careful only to keep it from Pepper. With the power to travel tens of thousands of light years in an instant, and the ability to change his clothes at will, finding himself a wife on every planet would be child's play. Over the past 10 months, though, Tony had come to see that Sonia, while not ticking every box on Damien's usual checklist for a partner, brought other invaluable qualities to the table. She was breathtakingly beautiful, exceptionally bright, and more than capable in everything she tackled. Sonia gave Tony a gentle, amused smile and waved off his over-earnest gestures. I'm heading back to the AI lab, she said. I won't intrude on your two-person world. Tony had actually come by to discuss business, but the moment Sonia mentioned returning to Blue Star, he wrapped up the visit with a few polite words and made his swift exit. After Tony rocketed off in his gleaming steel armor, Damien turned back to Sonia with a wry smile. Don't take his barbs too seriously. He's got a sharp tongue, but he means well. Sonia's cheeks warmed at the reminder of their private world, but she quickly composed herself. She offered him a gentle, reassuring smile and gave a crisp nod. Damien studied her for a moment. She was always so calm, it was nearly impossible to guess what she was thinking. I'll be heading over to Blue Star once I'm free, he continued. If you find yourself swamped with orders, feel free to scale back a bit. We've got our whole lives ahead of us. Earning a little less now won't ruin anything. He leaned forward, earnestness in his eyes. Stay positive about everyone back on the island, and focus on building your own strength. Since their conversation had naturally veered toward his upcoming departure, Damien felt compelled to offer a few more pointers. Sonia remembered Mr. Ace, Cassadine's advice, and realized his trip might be delayed longer than anticipated. She met his gaze with steady resolve. I'll handle everything to the best of my ability, she promised. You don't need to worry, Mr. Cassadine. Damien nodded in satisfaction. Good. I'm off to work now, and Tony's given me some solid information to act on. Damien hadn't replied to those messages yet. Sonia didn't press him further. Her silence spoke volumes about what she suspected. She simply nodded, offering him an understanding smile. "Take your time," she said softly. He returned her nod. As soon as Sonia stepped out of the living room, Damien poured himself the drink she'd prepared and took a long, thoughtful sip. His mind was elsewhere. Since arriving in this universe, where the catastrophic titans and disaster-born beasts never appeared, his evolution had slowed to a crawl. He now needed 2 million energy points for a single evolutionary leap. Even with 5 costly meals a day, he only averaged about 370,000 points daily. After 10 months of that regimen, he'd managed just 55 evolutions. His total evolution count had climbed to 587. Still, the Void Predator's powers had grown impressively. His foremost ability, Invisible Threat, evolution level 50, was now devastatingly refined. Whenever Damien faced a single opponent within 5 meters, he entered a state of ruthless focus. In that isolation, his slashes and piercings became unnaturally sharp, capable of cutting through even the toughest defenses. Leaning back on the couch, Damien closed his eyes. There was more work to do and more answers to find before he could confront whatever lay ahead. Promotion. Damien's heart pounded as the screen before him flickered and unveiled 4 brand new evolution skills, each marked at level 80. 1. Taste the Fear, evolution level 80. In a heartbeat, Damien can unleash 40 razor-sharp strikes in complete silence. When his target is isolated and unable to defend, the power of each stab intensifies dramatically, reducing foes to nothing more than trembling husks. 2. Void Thrust, evolution level 80. With a sudden pulse, he releases toxic, explosive thrusts in a full 360-degree arc, reaching up to 10,000 meters. Every creature struck bleeds life force back to Damien, rapidly accelerating the healing of his own wounds. Against enemies who are alone and helpless, both damage and life drain effects spike to devastating levels. 3. Leap Attack, evolution level 80. This skill launches Damien into an astonishing high-velocity jump. His airborne speed soars, and the force of his landing becomes earth-shaking, perfect for closing gaps or flattening multiple targets below. 4. Void Attack, evolution 80. By slipping into the void's darkness, Damien can move at blistering speed and phase through all matter. In that shadowy realm, no living being can perceive or track him, granting perfect stealth for assassination or escape. As the descriptions faded, Damien felt his power surge. At level 80, he had truly become a force of nature, silent, lethal, and untouchable. Damien's void skin had evolved 150 times, his mental resistance 65 times, and his breath twice. As long as he posed no direct threat to Blue Star, Gu Yi wouldn't move against him, and even if Gu Yi did decide to strike, Damien's power would force a retreat. This strength filled Damien with confidence and a deep sense of security. He'd already been more than capable of defending himself before the great gods ever appeared. Now, unless Thanos managed to assemble, or outright seize, all 6 Infinity Stones, he no longer had to fear being erased with a single snap. Author's note: this is our 5th update. Thank you for your support. Chapter 126 is currently under review and should be released tomorrow. Chapter 130. The new year is approaching. Over the next 6 weeks, Damien watched Sonia carry on with her duties as if nothing had changed. Her calm, composed demeanor reassured him. She showed no sign of being unsettled. During that time, Tony had also enlisted Sonia's help in procuring a collection of rare minerals and exotic materials, substances found only on distant alien worlds. One crisp morning, Tony strode into Damien's villa, clad in his armored suit, the soft hum of its servos echoing in the foyer. Brushing aside a stray lock of hair, he announced with a grin, "I'm flying back tomorrow." Damien looked up from the datapad he was reviewing. "Already?" Tony nodded. "I've mapped the wormhole jumps for the return trip, about 3 days in total. I want to surprise Pepper by getting home early, and I'll actually be there for Christmas." Damien raised an eyebrow. "You haven't told her yet?" "No," Tony admitted, laughing. "Where's the fun in that? I even convinced her to extend her plans so I could make an unexpected entrance." Damien smiled, shaking his head. "She might grumble at first about the last-minute change, but you're right. She'll be over the moon when you show up." Tony's grin widened. "Exactly what I'm counting on." With that, he tapped the side of his helmet and turned to leave, already looking forward to the holiday ahead. Damien studied Tony with a thoughtful expression. "Have you already said your goodbyes to everyone on the island?" Tony stiffened. He'd planned to return in time for Christmas, just 6 months away, and was certain a brief absence didn't require farewells. But Damien rarely spoke without cause. If he warned that Tony wouldn't be able to slip away so easily after 2011, there had to be a reason. "All right," Tony sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'll go down and see them before I leave." Damien nodded, as if he'd expected no less. At that moment, Sonia, who had been watching in silence, stepped forward. "When Mr. Cassidon arrives," she asked, "how long do you intend to stay on C-53 Blue Star?" "It depends on how things go. I might stay there a while, catch the show, and then come back." Damien paused, caught off guard by Sonia's offhand reference to his next trip. "Catch a show?" Sonia tilted her head curiously. "In a few years, someone called Star-Lord is supposed to come to Xandar." "Keep me posted if you hear anything about him," Damien said. He nodded, still absorbing the unfamiliar name. "Star-Lord? I've never heard of him." Sonia's eyes brightened. "And a few years from now, Mr. Cassidine, will you still be able to predict the future?" She searched her memory for any clue tied to that name, but found none. Surprise crept into her voice. If Damien truly possessed foresight, then perhaps this very moment had been predicted as well. What lay ahead for them? Had every twist and turn already been mapped out by him? Damien simply shook his head. "No," he replied quietly. Damien only gained true predictive power when he unlocked the Void Prophet trait, and even then, his visions were broad impressions of what might come, not detailed portraits of individual destinies. If another hero template ever crossed his path, he knew he wouldn't pick the Prophet of the Void again. He'd choose Void Fear instead, the same template that made Cho'Gath such a terrifying force. After all, everyone in their circle had embraced the Void Reaver trait and devoted themselves to building unstoppable physiques. Why chase magic when raw strength felt so much more certain? With a powerful body and the ability to teleport away before things went south, he could weather any threat and recover fully at his leisure. "That's settled," Mr. Cassidon declared. Hearing those words, Sonia exhaled for the first time in hours. If the future you glimpse is bright, knowing it feels like a blessing. If it's bleak, it's a curse. What Sonia feared most was that the Prophet's sight would show her no place at all in Mr. Cassidon's life, that he simply didn't care about her future or hers about his. But for now, at last, the tension in her chest eased. Damien leaned against the frosted window pane, watching the snowfall paint the island in white. Behind him, Sonia shifted nervously, as though waiting for him to speak. Finally, he turned. "You said Xandar's New Year falls on December 20th, right?" Sonia nodded, relief softening her features. "Yes, I'm just thinking, by then the island should be buzzing." He arched an eyebrow. "Daydreaming again?" She smiled, a hint of excitement in her eyes. "Not at all. Even in the depths of winter, this place is surprisingly alive. The Void Cult's membership has climbed to 427. Damien counted quietly on his fingers. 314 of those are already here, me excluded. All of us new recruits are planning to celebrate our first New Year together," she continued. "Many will spend the eve with their families, then return to the island for the festivities. And a lot of them want to visit the temple, pay homage at your statue, and thank you for giving them a new life." A small smile tugged at Damien's lips. The wind rattled the shutters, as though applauding. "Sounds like we're in for a proper celebration." Sonia's face lit up. "Exactly. After everything we've been through, I think it'll do us all good to come together." He glanced back at the swirling snow, imagining the crowds gathering, lanterns glowing against the white. "All right," he said softly. "Let's make this a New Year they'll never forget." "Then I'll stay through New Year's and set off afterward," Damien said with a smile when he heard that so many people were planning to spend the holiday on the island. "Really?" Sonia blinked, her eyes widening in surprise. The thought that Mr. Cassidon would ring in the New Year here filled her with joy, and an incredulous smile spread across her face. "Are you serious?" "Absolutely," Damien replied. "If everyone intends to pay homage at my statue, how could I not be here to join them?" "Wonderful. Then I'll start getting everything ready." Damien nodded. "Perfect. I'll go make the arrangements. A bright grin lit Sonia's face as she dashed downstairs to fetch the New Year decorations. Damien watched her go without comment. If he returned to Blue Star for New Year's, he'd be alone. Celebrating on Void Island, surrounded by all the excitement, seemed far more appealing. He didn't know much about Sonia's past. He had never pressed her, and she had never volunteered any details. Yet he distinctly recalled that when she'd applied to be his assistant, her resume had listed her relatives as none. Maybe he'd been killed in an accident. Maybe something else had come between him and Sonia. Whatever the reason, if he didn't show up, Sonia would have to spend New Year's Eve alone. They'd grown so accustomed to celebrating together that the thought of a solitary countdown felt hollow. No fireworks, no laughter, no comfort of a familiar shoulder. Yet here she was, waiting. Then on the 7th day, the first update arrived. Chapter 131, New Year's Pilgrimage. When Damien arrived at Kyle's new house, he found Renoli, Lacey, Kyle, and the Predictor gathered around the fireplace. Although none of them truly felt the chill of winter, their unusual constitutions kept the cold at bay, the crackling fire still lent the room a festive warmth. After all, even the most extraordinary lives benefit from a little ritual. Damien settled onto a low settee and looked around the room. "I'll be leaving for a while," he announced. "On December 20th, 5 days from now, I want us all to go out together and prepare a grand banquet." Renoli gave him a playful pat on the shoulder. "You've been away so long," he teased. "It's only fair you go home and see your wife first." "It won't be our last gathering," Lacey chimed in with a smile. "We're all living longer these days. There'll be plenty of time to celebrate again." Damien nodded, appreciating their light-hearted encouragement. Renoli cocked his head. "Didn't you say Xandar's New Year falls in 5 days, too?" Damien's brow lifted in surprise. "Right. You're planning your traditional pilgrimage to the island temple, aren't you?" Lacey's eyes sparkled at the mention. "Yes. Everyone on Xandar organizes a visit to the temple to welcome the new year. It's been centuries since the custom began." Kyle leaned forward, stoking the fire. "Then it's settled. We'll join your pilgrimage, Damien, and afterward, feast like kings." Damien smiled at the prospect, a true New Year's ritual shared with friends. The winter air may have been cold, but here, within these walls, the promise of celebration and camaraderie burned bright. Damien stepped onto the veranda just as Tony burst through the door, eyes sparkling with excitement. "You never told me about all these festivities," Tony exclaimed. Damien chuckled. "Come on. You've been holed up in the lab for over a month. I hardly saw you himself, let alone mention a party." Tony threw his head back in laughter. "Fair enough. But you've hosted enough dinners to know I'm always game. All you need is for me to show up." Kyle, lounging nearby, joined in with a booming laugh. "Who says Damien can't be persuaded?" Damien feigned offense. "Actually, I was planning to head home tomorrow, New Year's with my family." Kyle waved him off. "Now that you know what we've got cooking, you might as well stay. Celebrate here with us before you leave." Tony raised an eyebrow. "I'm in too," he paused, grinning. "I only came back to Blue Star to sneak a New Year's Eve visit with Pepper, had to suit up in full armor just to dodge the paparazzi. But on this island, I can finally drop the act and just have fun." He stretched out his arms as if embracing the night sky. "No armor, no filters, just us, good food, fireworks, and friends. Let's make this New Year's unforgettable." Damien smiled and nodded. "All right, you two, let's do it." Tonight, the island would come alive, and so would they. "Not heading home to spend the New Year with your wife?" the prophet asked. Damien shook his head. "Our Chinese New Year falls on December 24th, what you call Christmas, and the trip only takes me 2 days. So if you leave on the 21st, you'll make it back in time," the prophet concluded. "All right," Damien agreed. "Let's drop it. With the New Year coming, have you arranged the wine?" Tony grinned. "Absolutely. I'll have more than enough by then." Kyle chuckled. "Sounds perfect." With Tony deciding to stay a few more days, Damien exchanged farewells and departed. The next few days passed quietly until Xandar's New Year arrived on December 20th. At 5 o'clock in the morning, the sky was still black, and a bone-deep chill drove most people back under their blankets. But on Void Island, anticipation buzzed in the air. Candles flickered against the darkness as followers piled baskets high with food and wine, and made their way down the avenue toward the old temple. In the Void cult, devotion only sharpened the appetite, none more so than the disciples of Lord Cassidon. Their offerings glittered with exotic delicacies and rare vintages, ready to be laid at his altar in reverent celebration. Everyone walked together, laughter bubbling through the air. Clad in his signature steel armor, Tony set off a spectacular array of fireworks. With each booming crack and burst of color, the crowd's cheers grew louder. "Are these fireworks?" someone asked in wonder. "Yeah," another replied. "I heard on Blue Star they use them for New Year celebrations." "They're stunning," a third added, eyes fixed on the glittering sky. "I've been told every region has its own way of marking the New Year," someone else said. "Tony only learned about Chinese New Year a few days ago," a friend observed. "He probably didn't have time to prepare much." Amid the chatter and applause, the group's excitement was contagious. On Void Island, Tony Stark's reputation had spread far and wide. He joined Renault before most of them, and everyone knew his brilliance, his cutting-edge technology, and his boundless wealth. Each month he threw a grand banquet for all island members. Outside of Miss Sonia, no one was more admired. Only Lord Cassidon, the mighty god of the void, surpassed Tony in renown. A hush fell over the assembly as they reached the base of the grand temple. Though it was still before dawn, hundreds of lanterns and colored lamps bathed the stone walls in a warm, radiant glow, so bright that the night around them seemed to vanish. The air thrummed with anticipation beneath the soaring towers, and everywhere the structure exuded a silent majesty. At the heart of the temple's inner courtyard stood a massive obsidian statue of Cassidon, the god of the void. Before the statue floated several enormous stone platforms, each suspended in midair as if by divine will. They were large enough to hold dozens of people and the offerings they carried. A broad staircase of worn flagstones led up to them, and along its steps pilgrims had begun to gather. Suddenly a chorus of voices, 1, 2, 3, rose in unison. On that single count, every worshipper bent their knees, summoned their strength, and leapt nearly 10 meters into the air, each one bearing trays of food or stacks of coins. Despite the weight they carried, they landed as lightly as feathers upon the platforms. In perfect rhythm, they placed their offerings before the statue, sweet pastries, fragrant fruits, savory meats, and neatly coiled rolls of crisp parchment denoting their tithe. "Great Cassidon, we thank you for your mercy," they intoned together, bowing low. "My own power is small, but I offer what I can. Please accept this humble token of my devotion. In time, may my strength grow worthy of the new life you have given me, O Void Lord." When it came his turn, Damien carried 2 heavy trays piled with delicacies specially prepared by his family's master chef. He also clasped a leather pouch containing 500,000 coins. Laying both before the statue, he pressed his palms together and closed his eyes, voice soft but firm. "Great God of the void, accept my offering. You who have opened the path of rebirth for me, grant that I may one day prove myself worthy of your favor." He remained kneeling until the flickering lamps overhead dimmed slightly, as though Cassidon himself had acknowledged the prayer. Then, with a final breath of reverence, Damien rose, strengthened in spirit and ready for the trials to come. Damien used to have to scrape and save every coin just to cobble together 500,000 credits. Now, after joining the Void, he only needed 3 months' work to reach that mark. His life had changed beyond recognition. All around him, more than 300 new acolytes eagerly followed his lead, dropping canned goods, sacks of grain, fresh meat, even bottles of wine at the altar. Every donation was at least 500,000 credits. The principal benefactors, Renoli, Kyle, Predictor, and Lacey, each laid down 30 million. They all knew that the great Lord Cassidon dwelt somewhere on the island, and a few claimed to have caught a glimpse of his presence in the twilight mists. Between the donated food and the cash offerings alone, the total swelled past 300 million credits, heaped in a small mountain before the compound gates. When the last name was called and the formal confessions concluded, a serene hush fell over the crowd. Relief and resolve shone on every face, everyone except Tony's. He shifted from foot to foot, cheeks burning, convinced this wasn't the arrangement he'd signed on for. He wanted to shout out that Renoli and the others had promised that details didn't matter, so long as new recruits kept coming. But as one by one the devotees pressed forward, murmuring prayers and bestowing final blessings for peace of mind, Tony found his voice stuck in his throat. All that remained was the silence of satisfaction, and the uneasy dread gnawing at Tony that once the mountain of offerings had been hauled inside, nothing would be as they'd bargained for. Tony only had a few makeshift fireworks to mark the occasion, so proper preparations were out of the question, and by now it was far too late to remedy that. Sure, he could wire tens or even hundreds of millions, but he simply didn't have that kind of liquid cash on hand. Technically, the hundreds of millions he'd already earned helping Damien would more than cover the tribute, and he'd earn far more before long, so he wasn't strictly required to pay anything right now. Still, watching everyone else step forward with their offerings while he stood empty-handed stung his pride. As the ritual drew to a close and Tony wrestled with how to save face, a sweet, otherworldly voice cut through the night air. "Lord Cassidin, God of the Void, has heard your prayers and will arrive shortly." In that moment, a glowing message appeared overhead. Update number 2. Chapter 132. The God of the Void arrives. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the air, drawing every eye toward the temple's marble steps. Sonia glided out of the shadowed doorway, her long black gown whispering across the floor, her pale face calm and otherworldly. Normally, the gathered cultists would have showered her with compliments. Nowhere was the Angel of the Void more revered, but tonight their lips were sealed by the weight of her words. "Lord Cassidin will be with us shortly," Sonia announced, her voice steady. "May we be honored enough to glimpse his presence." A stunned hush fell over the courtyard. Only Tony, saved from certain doom by Damien's fearless intervention the previous night, felt gratitude so fierce it left him mute. Seizing the moment's confusion, he slipped behind a row of columns, determined to watch the coming event from a hidden vantage. Time stretched taut until the sky above Void Island cracked open. A massive rift tore through the heavens, its edges alive with churning violet energy. Dark tendrils of power unfurled into the night, alive with starlight that fractured into shimmering flecks. The sight should have inspired terror, but in the faces turned upward, it reflected pure, unwavering devotion. From that swirling portal stepped the incomprehensible form of Lord Cassidin. He stood more than 200 meters tall, his body a living tapestry of purple star stuff. A white robe billowed around him as if caught in an eternal breeze, and intricate golden armor adorned his chest and shoulders. His visage was hidden behind a smooth, featureless mask of burnished gold, catching every stray beam of light. At his presence, the entire assembly knelt in unison, voices lifted in a single, reverent acclamation. Hail to the God of the Void who had come to walk among them at last. From the yawning purple rift strode a figure of unimaginable scale. Though its features remained shrouded in shadow, its eyes gleamed like twin golden wheels, casting radiant light across the island. Over 200 meters tall, it gripped a star-forged void blade in its right hand, as if it reached out from the furthest reaches of the cosmos to stand here now. At that moment, every breath caught in their throats. Sonia, who had grown used to the casual, if unpredictable demeanor of Mr. Cassidin, was as stunned as the rest, her usual composure gone. Even Tony, fully aware that this apparition was nothing more than an embodiment of Damien's power, stared in disbelief. Then the figure's deep voice echoed across the clearing. "The great God of the Void has arrived." As the divine shadow settled, streams of violet energy unfurled like living starlight. The island was bathed in a luminous purple glow so vivid it seemed to pulse with otherworldly life. From Xandar, miles away, the spectacle did not go unnoticed. Hundreds of Nova Legion soldiers stationed southeast of Xandar City erupted in an uncontainable purple radiance, their horrified faces turned skyward. Several corps generals, too, exchanged grave, reverent glances, each fully aware that something monumental had just begun. "Norman, when you requested that meeting last time, your wording was fine, wasn't it?" The woman, every inch regal in her posture and attire, fixed her gaze on Norman Halls. "I followed your orders. I even offered 1 billion credits just to secure a conversation." Norman, a broad-shouldered blond man, frowned. "Yet Cassidin still refuses to see us," he said, voice low. "I wanted to assess his threat level, but I never imagined he'd push back so hard." He tapped a control panel. Had that burst of energy erupted at our current range, Xandar City would have felt the full force of it. "Divert all available power to the planetary shields," the woman commanded, "and keep a close watch on his movements." Norman nodded. "If he intends to engage, he won't be able to break out of his island base. He'll have to come to Xandar City." Around them, a handful of Centurions exchanged tense glances. Clad in the newest Samsung Star Force uniforms, these light officers could maneuver swiftly in the vacuum of space and had battled some of the universe's fiercest foes. Yet none had ever confronted a being like Kassadin, the god of the void. Kassadin cannot be classified as a mere human. In truth, he might as well be a monster, a demon, or even a god, so impossible is he to gauge. Faced with this unknown, overwhelmingly powerful presence, one that, to date, has shown no outward hostility, the Nova Corps have nonetheless hoped to establish some form of communication. Until now, however, Kassadin has refused every request for a parley, making any direct approach virtually impossible. Worse still, if he were to decide unilaterally to force obedience, the fighting that followed could cost untold lives on Xandar. For that reason, the Corps has repeatedly delayed any offensive or diplomatic venture. All the while, though, their vigilance over Void Island has only grown more intense. So it was, even as families gathered to celebrate the new year, that the sensors flared to life with an inexplicable vision emanating from Void Island. An immediate red alert swept through the Corps, summoning every Centurion and soldier into action. Within minutes, Damien, formerly known as Harvey, convened an emergency briefing to debate their next move. No final decision has been reached. All waiting, heartbeats tight with tension. "I only hope," Damien whispered as the room fell silent, "that Kassadin still retains a shred of decency." They'd never pick a day like New Year's to start a war. Too many families still at home celebrating, Irani Rael muttered, though her tone carried the weight of command. "I apologize for interrupting your holiday," she went on, stepping forward beneath the flickering hollow projections of Xandar's battle grid, "but all Centurions remain on high alert. We launch at the first sign of enemy movement." A dozen armored figures snapped to attention and echoed her order in perfect unison. On Void Island, the ground trembled as the great void god, Lord Kassadin, descended from the rift above. Instantly, hundreds of acolytes fell to one knee, heads bowed in synchronized reverence. Their voices rose like a tide through the cavern. "All hail the great god of the void." Perched on a floating outcrop, Damien felt the surge of awe sweep through the crowd. He couldn't resist its pull. Gliding down, he landed softly among the kneeling masses and lowered himself to the stone floor, joining in their chorus of devotion. Damien unfolded his arms, and the air around him rippled as he slipped into Kassadin's true form. He hovered above the gathered crowd, hundreds of worshippers clustered in the open plaza, his voice carrying on an uncanny, resonant echo. "Listen, faithful of the void. Our faith has but a single doctrine and only 3 commandments. No needless burdens, only devotion. I have witnessed your earnest prayers, your unwavering faith, and the strength you found within yourselves. So hold your heads high." A hush fell over the assembly as he paused, then continued more warmly. "Today is the new year of Xandar, a time for reunion, for joy, and for celebration. Whether you were born on these isles or traveled from afar, embrace the local customs and feast in my name." As Damien's words faded, a single, thunderous cry arose from below. "Yes!" Instantly, it swelled into a chorus of affirmation that rippled through every corner of the square. For many, this was their first sight of Lord Kassadin in flesh and spirit. Though they had prayed to the void god for years, few had ever seen him manifest so vividly. Now, seeing is believing, their faith deepened, their awe renewed. Together, they lifted their eyes and their hearts toward the infinite darkness Damien embodied, ready to celebrate a prosperous new year. Damien stood among the void cultists on the summit of Void Island, watching in awed silence. With a single, effortless step, Kassadin, the god of the void, seemed to dissolve into the very fabric of the void itself, disappearing without a trace. In that instant, the worshipper's eyes blazed with renewed devotion. This was the miracle that had first drawn them to the void, the power to cross galaxies in the blink of an eye, to shatter the limits of space and time. As Kassadin's presence faded, the brilliant starlight that had bathed Void Island's sky slowly dimmed. In its place rose an eerie, silvery twilight, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. The cultists fell silent, hearts pounding, caught between reverence for the vanished god and the thrilling promise of the void's boundless mysteries. Chapter 133, Sense of Identity. Dawn crept over the horizon, washing the sky in pale light as the last stars winked out. One by one, the assembled crowd rose to their feet, still buzzing with disbelief. "I can't believe we actually met Lord Cassadin today," someone murmured. "Those who went home to celebrate the new year will be kicking themselves," another chimed in. "They said they'd arrive tomorrow," a third added. No one expected the god of the void himself to show up tonight. Excitement lit every face as whispered conversations broke out. At the center, Sonia listened with a gentle smile. One of the onlookers stepped forward. "Sonia, thank you for bringing Lord Cassadin to us," he said. She shook her head, her expression calm. "You don't need to thank me. It was your devotion that moved him to accept our invitation." Behind that tranquil smile, Sonia thought, "I should be the one thanking you." When Lord Cassadin learned of your New Year plans, he chose to spend the festival here on Xandar. She wasn't yet privy to all he had revealed, only that he had entrusted her with making this announcement at precisely the right moment. Damien let the members of the Void cult know, through Sonia, that he had seen and accepted their prayers and offerings. To many of the faithful, this was the greatest gift he could bestow. "Your devoted Lord Damien has felt your tributes," Sonia announced, her voice calm but carrying through the hushed gathering. "And by Lord Damien's command, you are to share the food you have brought." She swept her gaze over those who still lingered, clutching baskets of fruit, dried meats, and loaves of bread. Sonia wasn't passing along a rumor. This was Damien's explicit instruction. A murmur of delight rippled through the crowd. "Thank you, Lord Damien, for your mercy." One worshipper cried out, and others echoed her gratitude. Although Sonia spoke only of sharing the food and made no mention of the monetary offerings, no one felt slighted. They knew there would be opportunity to present their coins after the new year. In just a few days, Damien would depart for an extended journey, and the cultists were determined to bask in his presence as long as possible, rather than rely solely on their cosmic communicator. Once they discovered that the offerings were free of void taint and perfectly safe to eat, the devotees began to exchange their provisions with genuine enthusiasm. Baskets were passed from hand to hand, laughter brightened the dim temple halls, and for a moment, the shadowy presence of the void itself seemed almost forgotten beneath the shared warmth of fellowship. They drifted apart into smaller clusters until Tony found himself chatting with Renoli, Kyle, Predictor, and Lacey beside a gleaming viewport. Renoli leaned forward, curiosity bright in her eyes. "Tell us about your home. C-53, wasn't it?" Tony nodded, settling back on the bench. "Right, Planet C-53, or Blue Star as we call it. In terms of climate and terrain, it's a lot like Xandar, but their technology still lags behind ours." He glanced around, making sure they were following. Blue Star isn't governed by a single united body. It's divided into independent nations, much like Earth's countries. The biggest players are places you might recognize, the United States, China, that sort of scale. "A whole planet made up of separate nations?" Lacey's eyebrows shot up. "So there's no united government at all?" "Exactly," Tony confirmed. "Their spacefaring capabilities are still pretty primitive. They can't do free space navigation yet, so most of their budget, about 3/4, goes into defense and infrastructure." Kyle whistled. "Sounds intense, but what about fun stuff? How do they unwind?" Tony grinned. "On that front, Blue Star really shines. Their entertainment industry, movies, VR, gaming, you name it, is actually more advanced than ours. They've invested heavily in leisure, and it shows." The others exchanged surprised looks. Most advanced worlds in the quadrant end up merging into unified societies before they develop distinctive cultural sectors. Tony caught their reactions and shrugged lightly. "Big changes take time," he said with a knowing smile. "But when it comes to having a good time, Blue Star has them beat, hands down." Damien leaned back and said, "If I have the chance, I'll go take a look myself." Lacey's curiosity was clearly piqued. "You don't think the people of Blue Star will suddenly attack me, do you?" Tony smiled reassuringly. "Not at all, Lacey. You look almost exactly like a native of Blue Star. You could walk right through their streets without anyone even noticing." Hearing Lacey express a desire to visit Blue Star, Tony immediately agreed. She'd be lost on her first trip and would inevitably rely on him for guidance. With his own forces fully committed elsewhere, he couldn't risk Lacey venturing off alone if something went wrong. "Are they anything like the Xandarians?" Damien asked. Lacey shrugged. "If they are, I still don't see why you'd have any trouble." Kyle rumbled his agreement. "You still have Renali on your itinerary, and as long as nothing hostile happens, you'll be fine." Tony nodded thoughtfully. Kyle was over 2 meters tall and built like a fortress, far stronger and larger than any Blue Star native. He hesitated, then asked, "So you're saying it could be dangerous for Kyle to go?" When Tony fell silent, the holographic predictor finally spoke up, its ethereal form flickering as it waited for an answer. Tony and Kyle stood before the prophet, whose head and face were completely swathed in bandages. Tony cleared his throat, choosing his words carefully. "There's nothing wrong with how you look, except that your ensemble is a bit too avant-garde for Blue Star. As it stands, people might just think you're a cosplayer." The prophet inclined his head. "I understand. I must return shortly." Tony offered a reassuring smile. "If you run into any trouble or need our help, just let us know. We'll come as fast as we can." The prophet's voice was calm. "Even if I don't require assistance, I would still be honored to host you on Blue Star. When you visit, I'll show you the finest entertainments we have to offer." "Sounds perfect," Tony replied. "Let us know when you've set a date, and we'll make plans." Kyle raised his glass. "To future adventures," he toasted, and laughter rippled through the small clusters of guests. Plates of hors d'oeuvre circulated as everyone chatted eagerly about what lay ahead. Meanwhile, back at Damien's villa, Sonia emerged from the family temple just as dusk settled. Stepping through the front doors, she discovered Mr. Cassidin had already returned, and the dining table was laden with a delicious spread, ready and waiting for her. "Please join us at the table," Damien said, noticing the look of surprise on Sonia's face. She hesitated. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Cassidin, but I wouldn't want to impose." Her gentle refusal tugged at Damien's heart, but he pressed on. "No, really, I want to celebrate the New Year here, because you're here. So please, sit with me." Sonia's cheeks warmed at his insistence. After a moment's pause, she offered a small, grateful smile and slipped into the seat beside him rather than directly across. In many cultures, choosing that spot signals respect for the host. Damien returned her smile. "Sonia, you've been such a help over the past year. I'm counting on you to keep an eye on Void Island in the months ahead as well." As she settled in, Damien's eyes flickered with something like admiration. He was glad she'd accepted, and proud to have her at his side for the coming year. Damien Cassidin had originally hired Sonia for a modest 500,000 yuan annual salary to handle his household. In practice, she'd done far more, overseeing every staff member, smoothing out day-to-day operations, and managing the island's logistics so effectively that Damien barely had to lift a finger. Realizing she'd long since outgrown her contract, he routinely supplemented her pay with generous bonuses. That evening, as the staff gathered for dinner, beneath the island's fading sunset, Damien stood and raised his glass. "Sonia," he began, voice warm, "you've more than earned every yuan, and then some. Even when I don't ask, you always know what needs to be done. Thank you." Sonia met his eyes and lifted her own glass. "No thanks necessary, Mr. Cassidin. I do this because I believe in Void Island, and in you." Their toasts set a cheerful tone. In the courtyard, small groups of workers exchanged stories and laughter. In the kitchen, the head chef, having masterfully prepared tonight's feast, lingered with his team over appetizers and a few celebratory drinks. They, too, chatted eagerly about visiting their families once this season's work was complete. Every smile, every shared plan spoke of the deep sense of belonging Sonia and Damien had fostered here. And with that, the fourth update drew to a close. Chapter 134, Return to Blue Star. The first day of the new year wound down in the glow of countless fireworks and the echoes of laughter. On Void Island, every member of the Void God cult had indulged in feasting, drinking, and merriment, and now, just as dutifully, they pitched in to clear away every scrap of trash before slipping off to find a place to sleep. Back in the laboratory, Damien emerged from the dining hall, still savoring the last notes of the celebration. His AI companion, Jarvis, greeted him with mild surprise. "Sir, you haven't joined such lively festivities in quite some time." Damien grinned as he stepped onto the polished floor. "I'm glad I stayed. I almost missed the grand finale." Jarvis hummed softly. "Well, now it's time to prepare for our return trip. Pepper is likely growing impatient." Damien's smile widened. "Pepper's tougher than she lets on. She may have scolded me, but she never tried to stop me from enjoying myself a little longer." "Precisely," Jarvis replied. "That's why this homecoming will come as a complete surprise." In high spirits, Damien strode past banks of glowing monitors and toward the hangar bay. There, his sleek spacefighter awaited, engines humming in standby mode beneath the overhead lights. He climbed into the cockpit, buckled in, and tapped a final confirmation on the console. "Set course for Blue Star," he ordered. "Course plotted," Jarvis responded. "Departure in T-minus 30 seconds." As the countdown began, Damien leaned back in his seat and allowed himself a moment's reflection. Tonight's revelry felt like a distant echo already, overtaken by the thrill of returning home, ready to greet Pepper and welcome a new year with fresh adventures on the horizon. Jarvis piloted the ship through cloud and sky until they broke free of the atmosphere and sailed into the blackness of space, embarking on the return journey. Tony Stark barely gave Damien a second thought. If Damien wished, he could shuttle endlessly between Xandar and Blue Star. But Tony was determined to witness firsthand the trouble Damien had warned him about. Damien lingered on Xandar for 2 more days. After a brief farewell with Sonia, just a few quiet words and a wave, he set off for Blue Star. It had been a year since he'd returned to his manor there, and after 12 months on the endlessly busy Void Island, the silence of home felt both strange and welcome. He stepped into the grand foyer and paused. "Turn on the lights," he said. Soft, warm illumination filled the halls. Damien shrugged out of Cassidon's armor and slipped into a fresh set of clothes. He'd long since decided he couldn't afford to be idle, and he was done playing the part of Cassidon. Here, in his own empty rooms, he could finally relax and be himself. Damien hadn't logged into Pet World in months. The moment the game client updated and he finally jumped back online, 8 emails from customer support flooded his inbox. The operators had noticed his long absence and assumed he'd quit in frustration over some unmet feature requests. But Damien was too easygoing to take it personally. It was just a pet-raising simulator, after all, and gaming remained one of his only pastimes on Blue Star. A little real money spending to enhance the experience felt perfectly reasonable. He skimmed the patch notes, caught up on the new Krypton Gold consumables, and marveled at the mythical beast pets players were raving about. Without hesitation, he set out to farm enough in-game gold. In no time, he'd amassed a small fortune, then splurged on 90+ of every newly released Krypton Gold booster. He even stocked up on a vault's worth of enhancement stones to supercharge them. No sooner had he completed his purchases than whispers began to circulate through the Buddhist Players Guild chat. "Isn't that the guy who quit months ago? He really bailed, didn't he?" Let them talk. Damien simply leaned back, eager to unleash his new treasures on the server. "We haven't seen him in at least a year, have we?" Someone typed in the chat. "Who is this boss, anyway?" another player asked. "He's the biggest whale this game has ever known," came the reply. "Nobody even dares to compete when he's pouring cash into it." "Seriously, so much money, and nowhere to spend it but on us," someone teased. "Might as well use it to pick up girls, right? Or maybe he's just bored and looking for entertainment," another shrugged. "Could it be a trap?" someone ventured. "Not a chance," came the confident answer. "His ID is legendary. He's the top spender in every game he plays." It was Christmas Eve, and apart from the restaurants and hotels that stayed open, most people were home for the holidays. On top of that, the game's massive Christmas event had everyone logging in. Dozens of players crowded the global chat, all eyes fixed on the mysterious Buddha player, whose avatar was rapidly leveling and strengthening gear at a pace no one had seen before. Meanwhile, Damien's return had set off alarms among the game operators. A few of his latest achievements, like ranking up 30 times in a single day, had exceeded what the developers believed possible. They'd capped certain milestones precisely because they never expected anyone to hit them. Yet here Damien was, shattering every limit and reminding everyone that in this world of pixels and power, legends never truly fade. They just lie in wait. Damien finally confirmed what everyone had been whispering about. There really was a top Krypton gold whale on the server. A quick background check revealed his in-game name was Buddhist, and relief washed over Damien. Rumor had it this player could bankroll the entire game single-handedly. When Buddhist vanished for months without a trace, the development team went into a tailspin. Messages, DM offers, in-game gifts, nothing could coax him back. Damien had nearly given up hope, convinced the whale had walked away for good. Then, just when all seemed lost, Buddhist reappeared and resumed flooding the game with gold. Damien watched the balance counter climb, a broad grin spreading across his face. "Looks like we're in for a stellar year," he murmured. While the whale's return guaranteed a healthy cash flow for the studio, Damien had his own priorities. He was topping up his personal stash of Krypton gold and indulging in every greasy craving he'd developed since arriving on Xandar. He'd placed a massive fast food order that morning, craving nothing but crispy fried chicken and stacked burgers. Here, Sonia handled every detail of his meals, consulting with the head chef, finalizing menus, and bringing each dish straight to his door. Luxury came easy, but even in this high-tech world, Damien knew there was no comfort, quite like a cardboard box full of fried chicken wings and a pile of juicy burgers. Damien grinned as he slid back into Blue Star's lobby. After a long day, how could he not treat himself? He tapped his phone and loaded up on takeout. Enough greasy food and happy water, soda, to last him through a marathon session. From morning till evening, he'd flooded the game with real-world cash, bypassing any chance-based systems to max out every enhancement. All his digital pets now stood at the peak of their potential. He followed his usual routine, equip the strongest gear, summon his loyal companions, then breeze through the daily quests. Within minutes, he'd cleared every dungeon on the schedule, scooped up the highest rewards, and polished off his leveling objectives. Before logging off, he paused to admire his roster of perfectly trained pets, each one gleaming with power, then shut the game down with a satisfied nod. Across the globe, in the dead of night on December 23rd, another kind of arrival was unfolding. At precisely 10 p.m., a stealth-configured starfighter touched down within the grounds of Stark Manor. Its electromagnetic signature was all but invisible, an anti-reconnaissance design that set every shield sensor on edge. For the past year, Tony Stark had been missing. His absence was a curiosity and a concern, logged in S.H.I.E.L.'s central database. Agents probing for word from inside the mansion had only heard silence from Pepper Potts, Stark's loyal secretary, who insisted Tony was not in immediate peril. Tension rippled through S.H.I.E.L.'s ranks as they maintained a constant vigil over the sprawling estate. Tonight's mysterious spacecraft landing only deepened the questions. Who had arrived under cover of darkness, and what fate had befallen the absent Iron Man? Chapter 5. Damien stood on the observation deck, his eyes fixed on the alien ship descending through the atmosphere. Its gleaming hull and advanced design spoke of technology centuries beyond anything Blue Star had ever seen. Even the veterans of S.H.I.E.L.D. looked on in stunned silence. Nick Fury, arms crossed beneath his leather jacket, narrowed his gaze. "Where on earth did Tony Stark get hold of that?" Phil Coulson exchanged a troubled look with Damien. "I've never seen anything like it," he admitted. "We've got entire divisions studying extraterrestrial tech, Kree, Skrull, you name it, and we're still years behind. Yet here's Tony, back after a year's disappearance, piloting a ship that makes our best prototypes look like toys." Damien felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Since Stark's sudden return, rumors had swirled about breakthrough discoveries in his private lab. But that was on a different level entirely. As the ship's engines hummed a deep, resonant chord, he realized they were witnessing a new chapter in human and perhaps interstellar history. Nick Fury stepped forward, voice low and decisive. "All right, we find out everything we can about that ship, and we keep a close eye on Tony Stark." He turned to Damien. "You're with me. Coulson, I want eyes on every S.H.I.E.L.D. facility Stark's walked through in the past 12 months. Let's get to work." Damien nodded. As he followed Fury toward the briefing room, He couldn't shake the sense that the world had just taken a giant leap forward, and that all hell might be waiting on the other side. Chapter 135, Nothing to Fear. Black Widow moved through the dimly lit hangar, her gaze sweeping over the alien technology lining the walls. She glanced at Nick Fury, who was studying a holographic display. "Do you want to question him now?" Natasha asked. Fury tapped his earpiece. "I just got word that Damien Ambalaka returned this morning." Natasha folded her arms. "How long before he leaves again?" "He hasn't set a departure date yet," Fury replied. "And between you and me, he's not exactly thrilled to see either of us. He does have a slightly better impression of Coulson, though." Natasha raised an eyebrow. "Then let Coulson handle it." Fury nodded slowly. "If you ask me, we should wait until after New Year's. Tony Stark just reappeared after a year off the grid. He'll want some downtime." He leaned closer. "If we push now, we'll risk alienating him. That won't help any of us." Just then, Phil Coulson stepped into the bay, catching the tail end of the conversation. "So you want me to reach out to Stark?" "Exactly," Fury said. "Approach him gently. If he's reluctant to share what we need, use soft persuasion, no heavy-handed interrogations." Coulson smiled wryly. "Got it. He's one of the Avengers now. We tread lightly." Fury gave a curt nod. "Good. Let's make sure neither Damien nor Tony has anything to fear." With that, Coulson turned and headed for the exit, as Kent, ready to bridge the delicate gap between S.H.I.E.L.D. and the world's greatest heroes. Chapter 8. Even if he refuses to share all of his S.H.I.E.L.D. technology, as long as our relationship remains intact, he'll still be a valuable asset, Agent Coulson explained. "And don't forget," Nick Fury added, leaning against the conference table. "His friend is the devil Damien Ambalaka. We can't afford to push him either." Fury's words lingered in the war room. Despite their frustration at being shut out of certain projects, they knew the stakes were too high to risk alienating either man. "Understood," Fury concluded, his steel-gray eyes sweeping the team. Coulson nodded in agreement. Pepper Potts was pacing the hangar floor when Tony Stark's sleek space shuttle descended through the muted winter sky. The landing gear touched down with a hollow echo against the concrete. Moments later, the hatch hissed open, and a figure clad in gleaming red and gold armor strode out. Pepper's heart leapt. "Tony, I thought you were staying on Titan for another week." "I changed my mind," Tony called back, his voice crackling through the suit's speakers. He unsealed his helmet with a click and stepped forward, the morning light glinting off his chest plate. "I wanted to surprise you and wreck Christmas with some last-minute tinkering." Without waiting, he scooped Pepper into his arms. She laughed, legs reflexively wrapping around his waist. "You better have a good reason." Tony set her down and gave her a playful shrug. "Between you and me, Sonia's been dragging her feet on our next expansion project back home. She claims it's too soon to scale up. So I figured, why not cut my losses, come back early, and spend the holidays with my favorite person?" Pepper raised an eyebrow. "Sonia? Who's Sonia?" Tony's grin turned sheepish. "You know, Miss Sonia Laurent, the new operations director at Stark Industries. She's got ideas. I just don't think they're quite, well, you know me." Pepper unfolded her arms, crossing them as she studied him. Despite the chill in the hangar, she felt warm all the same. "So Christmas with me beats corporate politics?" "Always," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Now, what do you say we get out of this drafty hangar and start celebrating?" Pepper smiled, her doubts melting away. "Lead the way, Mr. Stark." As they headed toward the elevators, the winter wind swirled behind them, carrying the promise of quiet moments and a very Merry Christmas. "Even if I had all the courage in the world, I still wouldn't dare make a move on her." Tony glanced at Pepper with a soft sigh. "You've got the wrong idea. Sonia isn't a rival. She's Damien's housekeeper." Pepper scowled. "This isn't the place to talk. Come on, let's go inside." Seeing the jealousy flicker across her face, Tony scooped her up in his arms and led her into the villa's grand foyer. Pepper set her feet on the marble floor and exhaled sharply. "Wait, are you telling me that Mr. Damien actually hired a housekeeper?" He nodded. "Yep, and she's stunning." Pepper's eyes widened. She'd tried reaching Tony countless times, but he was always holed up in his research lab, tinkering with gadgets she couldn't even begin to understand. He rarely shared anything about his life beyond that door. Now, absorbing this new twist, Pepper rubbed her chin. So this Sonia, you're saying she checks off Damien's second dating criterion? Tony smiled wryly. Right, beautiful and brilliant, and from what I've seen, she's definitely taken with him. Pepper's brow shot up. And Damien knows all this? Why hasn't he done anything then? Tony shrugged, a puzzled look crossing his face. Honestly, I don't get it. He's shy. Pepper laughed, incredulous. Damien? Shy? The same Damien who can outthink, nay, out-invent, just about anyone? I'll believe the sky is falling before I believe he's bashful. Tony grinned. Stranger things have happened. Even the most powerful minds have their weak spots. Pepper frowned. So you're just like you used to be, and you still haven't had your fill of fun. She shook her head, exhaling slowly. I've thought it over, but between Miss Sonia's temperament and Damien's, well, identity and abilities. Damien could court 180 wives with ease, Tony cut in, gathering Pepper in his arms and helping her settle on the sofa. He pressed a soft kiss to her temple, and his body could handle it. Pepper bit her lip. And I almost forgot, Miss Sonia's not just anyone. She's a member of the Void cult. Tony chuckled as they leaned against each other, their voices carrying over the cosmic communicator. What else is there to say after that? Pepper curled closer. She knew Damien had emerged from the unknowable void. His values didn't follow Blue Star's laws or morals. If rumors were true, limitless appetite and boundless charm were just his starting points. Let's drop it for now, she murmured. Tony slipped a hand beneath her blouse, tracing the curve of her waist. Though they could glimpse each other now and then through the communicator, nearly a year apart had made every moment precious. Tony glanced at the screen, where Damien's intense gaze met his. Pepper smiled mischievously. Don't let him steal my beautiful secretary. They laughed softly together, the tension dissolving as they lost themselves in each other's warmth. Damien had managed to keep busy with countless tasks on the island, otherwise his longing for Pepper would have burned him alive. Now that he was finally back on Blue Star and standing face to face with her, restraint seemed impossible. First, take off your armor, he said, voice low with urgency. Pepper rolled her eyes at his impatience but complied. Right, almost forgot. Jarvis 2, retract the armor, Damien instructed. With Jarvis 1 still offline from the trip, he had no choice but to rely on Jarvis 2. Within moments, the sleek plating slid away, leaving him free to enfold Pepper in his arms. That night, they barely slept, caught up in the warmth and comfort of each other's company. Eventually, Pepper settled against his broad shoulder, breathing softly. Lifting her gaze, she asked, How long are you planning to stay on Blue Star this time? Tony leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming against the tabletop. I'd originally planned to stay at least 3 months, enough time for us to catch up. But if you'd rather I stayed longer, I can extend my trip to 6 months. Pepper's expression softened with concern. Before you returned, Damien warned you that you might not be able to come back to our universe right away. He said something big could be stirring on Blue Star, something that could strand you the Thought Ray. Tony exhaled slowly. He did. Damien only shares scraps of information, though. We won't know what's really happening until it happens. Pepper reached across the table and gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. Just in case things go sideways, you'll be safe with Damien. He's already back on Blue Star. Even though he's usually pretty detached about that place, he'd never let you fend for yourself if your life was on the line. Between his skills and the fact that your patron is stationed there as well, you'll have solid backup. Tony allowed himself a small, relieved smile. With Damien and his own backer on Blue Star, any threat suddenly felt a lot less intimidating. Pepper nodded in agreement. As long as he doesn't go out of his way to stir up trouble and keeps everything under control, I won't worry, even if Guyi shows up. To be honest, now that Mr. Damien is stationed here on Blue Star, I can finally breathe easy. 8 days later, the first update arrived. Chapter 136, Internal Strife or External Enemies. Over the holidays, Tony set aside every project on his desk and devoted himself entirely to Pepper. They didn't part until January 1st, 2011, when Tony picked up the phone. He knew Damien was spending New Year's Day alone at home, so he invited him over for a proper dinner. Damien, tired of living on fast food, didn't hesitate to accept. During the past year, Stark Industries had paid Damien another $1.8 billion in dividends. The company's growing foothold in the energy sector meant its profits climbed steadily, and Damien's liquid assets now topped $2 billion. In other words, he really could lie back and watch the numbers roll in, if he wanted to. That evening, Damien arrived at Tony's mansion to find Pepper greeting him in the foyer. A long dining table, groaning under platters of roast beef, seafood, and all the trimmings, awaited them in the dining room. Pepper offered him a warm smile and a slight bow. "Happy New Year, Mr. Damien," she said. "Tony and I both hope we can count on your support in the year ahead." Over dinner, Tony regaled them with stories of his latest breakthrough on Xandar, how he'd harnessed graviton technology to stabilize exotic energy fields. Damien listened intently as Tony explained the design challenges and the revolutionary test results. It became clear that a significant portion of the project's rapid progress was thanks to Damien's earlier investment. Without his backing, the Graviton Initiative would never have moved so swiftly from theory to proof of concept. As the clock struck midnight on January 1st, the three of them sat back, glasses raised. New Year's fireworks exploded overhead, but in Tony's workshop, and in Damien's bank balance, the real sparks were only just beginning. Pepper stared up at the massive holoscreen Jarvis had activated. Though the recording couldn't match the thrill of witnessing it live, it still sent a shiver down her spine. Hundreds of people bowing in reverence before Damien's colossal form. At over 200 meters tall, he loomed like a living skyscraper, and for a moment, Pepper feared her knees might give out. "Miss Potts," Damien rumbled, his voice surprisingly soft for something so huge, "you really don't have to be so formal." Pepper flinched, realizing she'd been curtsying. She quickly straightened. Damien continued with an easy smile. "Tony's genius speaks for itself. He doesn't need me to hold his hand. If anything, his innovations have done wonders for my bottom line, so you can rest assured liquidity will never be an issue." Heat rose to Pepper's cheeks at his kindness. "Thank you, Mr. Damien, and thank you for giving Tony the chance to explore the universe." "Likewise," Damien replied. "I appreciate all you've done to bring him here." Before Pepper could reply, Tony cleared his throat. She glanced over to find him watching her with a serious look. "Pepper, could you fetch the rest of the dishes from the kitchen?" he asked. Pepper blinked, nodded, then turned back to Damien. "I'm sorry, Mr. Damien. I didn't mean to. I just—" Damien chuckled, the sound like distant thunder. "No harm done, Miss Potts." Tony shook his head, a faint smile appearing. "Pepper, this really isn't like you." Flushing, she offered a sheepish grin. "I know. Seeing both of you, so impressive, I let myself get a little starstruck." Damien laughed again, a deep, warm rumble that resonated through the hall. As Pepper hurried off to the kitchen, both men watched her go, amused and oddly proud of their indefatigable assistant. Pepper paused at the doorway and gave them an apologetic look. "Please forgive me if I offended anyone. It all started when I mentioned the New Year's pilgrimage to Xandar, and then showed her that video." With Pepper gone, Tony cleared his throat and approached Damien, cheeks a little pink. "Pepper isn't naive. She's just never left Blue Star before. She wanted to see a glimpse of what you find so fascinating out here." Damien shrugged. "No need to worry about me getting upset. I've handled other situations than this." He leaned against the bulkhead, thinking it over. On Xandar, he could come and go as he pleased, same as when he's back on Blue Star. Sonia never objected to his travels. At most, she'd ask when he planned to return, which was perfectly reasonable. But if he drifted off the beaten path on the station, she'd nag him about being careful. Even a few hours away would have her calling non-stop. Tony nodded slowly. "So that's why you wanted to head back to Blue Star, for a little fun." Damien cracked a grin. "It feels more freeing there, though, of course, there's no such thing as total freedom." Tony smiled, finally understanding. "Yeah, I get that." Damien had forged strong ties with many members of the Void cult on Void Island, but only a few ever met him in person. Because Cassidon's true identity was at stake, Damien always kept his guard up. "Sure, the food, drinks, and rest on Xandar are top-notch," he admitted, "but for freedom, just being myself, I feel more at ease among people there." At Tony's, Damien skipped all pretense and slid into the chair at the head of the table. "Really, Xandar feels more like home." "Because there you don't have to hide who you are," Tony said, voice tightening. You can let your power loose without worrying about exposure. On Earth, Damien had to suit up before stepping outside. Without his armor, his human identity, and everything he stood for, would be laid bare. Damien nodded. Tony, you only got back a few days ago. Even if I wanted to jet off again, I'm grounded for at least another 6 months. Just then, Pepper brought steaming platters from the kitchen. She paused at Tony's comment and offered a reassuring smile. I know. You don't have to stress. I might be gone even longer. Tony met her eyes calmly. Then we'll make sure everything runs smoothly until you're back. Tony, if there's something you need me for, just say so, Damien said, cutting straight to the point. Tony glanced up in surprise. I don't like people dancing around the issue. Just tell me what you want. Damien rolled his shoulders, his hands still twitching with nervous energy. All right, I want to know what kind of trouble I've got coming this year. I get that some things have to stay classified, but at least give me a broad outline. Otherwise, I'm not sleeping a wink. Tony studied him for a moment, then sighed. Damien was too sharp to baffle with half-truths. Fine. You want the gist? It involves the Avengers. Damien arched an eyebrow. He knew Tony was the only active member at the moment, and that Stark, and by extension S.H.I.E.L.D., only called the Avengers into action for threats beyond Earth's borders. So we're talking an alien invasion? Tony's expression turned grim. That's the short version. Something's heading our way from beyond Blue Star's atmosphere. Nick Fury can't send me in for a purely terrestrial conflict. Avengers only respond to interstellar enemies. Whatever's coming, it's not a routine border skirmish. Damien let that sink in. I see. Then I'd better brace myself. Tony nodded. Exactly. And Damien, keep this between us. If the public catches wind, we'll have chaos on top of an invasion. Damien straightened. Understood. No loose ends. He gave Tony a firm nod, then turned away, mind already racing through defensive strategies. Chapter 7. Damien set down the datapad and studied Tony Stark's profile intently. Whether this counts as a foreign invasion really depends on our definition. Blue Star lies within Asgard's sphere of influence, and, while Loki may be adopted, he is still a prince of Asgard. If Loki calls in Thanos' legions, is this a civil war or an outright invasion? Tony's brow furrowed. Wouldn't the All-Father, King Odin himself, or the Ancient One step in to settle this? Damien shook his head. They won't. He tapped the pad, bringing up intercepted transmissions. Odin's been played by Loki before, and he's not about to rush in again. As for the Ancient One, she's made it clear she won't intervene in Asgardian affairs, even if Thor S's her. A slow smile spread across Tony's face. So that means you're free to handle it. Damien met his gaze calmly. Yes, I'll deal with Loki and Thanos' forces before they can gain any real foothold. Tony relaxed into his chair, relief evident in his posture. Good. If you can sort this quickly, it saves the rest of us a lot of trouble. Damien gave a curt nod. Consider it done. With that, he tapped a final command into the pad and stood, ready to depart for Blue Star and confront the looming threat head-on. At this stage of his life, Loki's power comes more from raw physical strength than from any mastery of magic. He can spar with a fair number of heroes and hold his own, but when he faces truly mighty opponents, his power still isn't enough. Thor, by contrast, is in a completely different league. Under normal circumstances, Thor is already formidable, but once he shifts into what some jokingly call his absent father mode, his strength soars to absurd, almost unimaginable levels. This is the second update, Chapter 137, Fame and Taking the Wheel. I'll keep a close watch on the global news feeds, Damien said, settling back in his chair. If they show up anywhere, I'll be there right away. Tony let out a relieved laugh. He didn't even bother to ask Damien where the aliens might strike next. He trusted that, wherever they appeared, Damien would move in without hesitation. After all, Thor's powers were still down, and even at full strength he'd never threaten Earth. Tony knew his real concern was Loki, not some off-planet invader. With that understood, the trio relaxed completely. Pepper smiled as she served their lunch, and soon the room was filled with the warm clink of cutlery and light-hearted banter. For the first time in days, there was no immediate crisis looming over them, just good food and friendly company. When the plates were cleared, Damien rose and stretched. You two enjoy the rest of your afternoon. I'm going to take my car out for a spin, and maybe see what or who I can find. Tony waved him off. Have fun. Don't get into too much trouble. Damien grinned, grabbing his jacket. No promises. With that, he headed for the garage, eager for a change of pace and whatever adventures the open road might bring. Damien's first clear memories of 2011 are of Captain America waking from the ice and Thor's thunderous arrival. He can't pin down the exact month, but he's certain it was only a matter of a few months before the world really began to shift. All he had to do was wait for the next big moment. Behind the wheel of his sleek luxury car, Damien weaves through New York's streets, even during the chaos of Chinese New Year. The city's festive banners flutter over neighborhoods where traditions are simple but passions run high. It isn't uncommon to hear of someone attempting to walk out of a store without paying, or in the worst cases, brandishing a gun when things go south. Yet veterans of these streets, delivery drivers, bike messengers, cabbies, know better than to cross paths with Damien's gleaming ride and its exclusive license plate. They may curse under their breaths, even flip him the bird, but they never press their luck. None are foolish enough to trade their lives for pride. For years before Damien met Tony Stark, New York's richest man and former arms tycoon turned industrial savant, he'd driven those avenues without a single close call. Strange, then, that such uneventful outings could feel ominous. After all, a young man who counted Tony Stark as a friend and frequently roamed the halls of Stark Manor shouldn't be so easy to surprise. And yet, as the city's pulse keeps quickening, Damien senses that real danger may be just around the corner. This kind of reputation had long since spread through New York's streets and alleys. Even though Tony Stark had slimmed down his holdings to concentrate on clean energy, his enterprise still dwarfed any rival. Everyone in the city knew about his secret identity as Iron Man and his close ties to the military, so street-level thugs dared only swagger in front of ordinary citizens. Crossing Stark himself was unthinkable. When word came that New York tycoon Damien had reappeared after a year in hiding, the entire underworld held back. None of the city's gangs wanted a stray bullet, or to face the wrath of a man worth billions. They wouldn't even risk scratching his car. They simply couldn't afford the reprisal. Meanwhile, socialites and influencers caught wind of his return, dressed to the nines, and flooded the sidewalks for a glimpse. After all, seeing a man with a net worth north of $8 billion was an opportunity no one wanted to miss. They were raking in billions in dividends every year, no longer hopeful up-and-comers, but proven winners. Damien, still unmarried and undeniably handsome, had become the toast of New York's social scene. His Asian heritage posed no obstacle. Wealth and generosity mattered far more than skin color. On the 1st of January, when most of the city was off work celebrating the holiday, Damien decided to take his motorbike out for a bay spin and see who was about. To his surprise, the streets were filled with well-dressed women, all giving him knowing glances. Yet he wasn't impressed. He didn't object to a little makeup. After all, a tasteful touch could accentuate a woman's natural beauty, but he drew the line at transformations so extreme that you couldn't recognize the person beneath. To Damien, real beauty was unmasked and effortless, not hidden behind layers of paint. Damien was extremely fastidious about cleanliness. No bright red lipstick or artifice would ever win him over. He'd rather look past the world's most celebrated vamp than compromise on purity. He prized natural beauty above all, someone who'd carried the innocence of her first youth into adulthood. Damien valued physical pleasure without the weight of emotional ties. He didn't demand a woman's virginity, but he believed her experience should be limited. That uncompromising standard made him the embodiment of selectiveness. Yet, when he did choose someone, it was always a once-in-a-million kind of choice. He wasn't like Tony, the notorious New York playboy who kept a rotating harem at his beck and call. Damien had all the time in the world, and every night he'd ease his convertible through the city's streets, winding down dimly lit avenues and pausing outside elegant bars, waiting for a woman striking enough to spark her own conversation. Hours passed, and his hopes dwindled, just as he was about to admit defeat and head home. Damien eased into the plush leather of his car seat and let the engine idle. He was about to settle in for the drive when a striking figure appeared at the curb. She was tall, with flowing brown hair and an elegance that bordered on frost. Her eyes swept the street until they landed on him, and suddenly lit up. In brisk strides, she approached the passenger window, her black pencil skirt and crisp white blouse framing an unmistakably hourglass silhouette. Nothing about her outfit screamed coquette, and yet she'd found a way to look every inch the seductress. She tapped lightly on the glass. "Are you Damien Ambalaka, the young tycoon from New York?" Her voice was poised, but her hesitation crept in at the end. Damien lifted his gaze. He had to admit, she was beautiful. High cheekbones, full lips, and perfectly applied makeup betrayed hours in front of a mirror. Yet he sensed the performance, the expensive blouse that didn't quite fit, the borrowed look of confidence. He smiled thinly. "That's me," he said, voice cool. "But you're not exactly my type. You might want to head home now." Her flush deepened. Damien watched the color rise in her cheeks, then turned his attention back to the road, unwilling to entertain any further charade. Damien stood in the dimly lit lounge, arms folded across his chest, watching the young woman approach him with a mixture of hope and desperation in her eyes. Her name tag read Tess, and her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the tremor in her hands. Tess cleared her throat. "I heard that if I spend the night with you, I could walk away with a large sum of money." He raised an eyebrow. "That's what you heard?" She swallowed hard, her voice quivering with urgency. "I'm short on funds. Please, give me a chance. Just look me over, see if I fit what you're looking for." Damien's lips curled into a cool, dismissive smile. "I've heard that one too many times. If you need money, there are plenty of ways to earn it. Work, loans, even finding a patron who's actually interested in supporting you." Tessa's lower lip quivered. She bit it softly, the red gloss gleaming. "But you're different," she pleaded. "I've seen your reputation. You pay very well." He sighed, stepping back so his height and the sharp cut of his jacket were on full display. "I do have money, and yes, I've been known to pay generously, under the right conditions. But let me be perfectly clear. I only pay if you want this as much as I do. No guilt trips, no moral ultimatums. If your only reason is that you're broke, I'm not interested." Tessa's shoulders slumped. The hope in her eyes flickered out, replaced by shame and disappointment. Damien watched her warily, already turning his attention back to the bar, leaving Tess to reconcile her pride with her predicament. "Please," the young woman whispered, pressing her hand against the car window and clinging to Damien's. "I need to raise $100,000 in 3 days, or I'm done for." Damien frowned. "But the banks are closed for the holiday. Even if you wanted to mortgage your house, you can't get a cent right now." She shook her head, eyes brimming with desperation. "I've been scrambling, calling in favors, begging friends to help me gather the money, but I'm not sure they'll honor their commitments once the deadline passes." She searched his face, as if hoping for a miracle. "The people I've approached in New York, I don't know if they'll cut me off afterward. I can't risk the rest of my life on empty promises." Her voice caught. "I know you keep your word, Damien. The night we spent together, you said you'd pay whatever it took, then walk away, no questions asked. I don't need millions, just 100,000. Give me that, and I swear I'll return it within a day, a week, a month, and after that, I'll never trouble you again. Please." She tightened her grip on his hand, her eyes pleading. "Please, get in the car." Damien's voice was quiet but firm. The woman, her cheeks streaked with tears, nodded and slipped into the passenger seat without another word. Thank you so much," she murmured, her voice choked with relief. Damien closed the door and gave her a moment to compose herself. As she fastened her seatbelt, she glanced at him with a mixture of hope and nervous anticipation. Rumor had it that Damien Ambalaka was a young millionaire who never lingered after a one-night encounter. No promises, no complications. To her, that was the perfect arrangement. She needed money, and she needed it fast, without inviting a lifetime of obligations or heartbreak. In her mind, this was a calculated risk with clear benefits, and Damien, she hoped, would be generous enough to help her when it mattered most. Chapter 138. Good Deeds and Rumors. Damien's voice was cool and controlled as he leaned forward. "Listen carefully. What happens tonight stays between you and me. I'll pay you everything you're due, but after this, I never want to see you again. And don't even think about using my name to spread stories about us. Understand?" The woman's eyes brimmed with tears, but she nodded vigorously. I understand. Thank you. Thank you for giving me this chance. Satisfied, Damien stood and offered a curt nod. Without another word, they left the office and made their way to his secluded manor. The night that followed was long and fraught with hesitations, neither of them quite sure where they stood, until dawn finally yielded to the heat of the rising sun. It wasn't until mid-afternoon that the woman awoke. Every movement sent a dull ache through her body, but the sight of thick stacks of crisp U.S. bills piled neatly on the nightstand dulled the pain almost entirely. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed and approached the table, noticing a single sheet of paper tucked beneath the top bundle. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it. The note read, "Take this money and leave. Do not contact me again. $500,000. Her breath caught at the sight of so much cash in her hands. Damien had kept his word. He'd paid her in full, spared no expense, and, true to his warning, had ensured their encounter remained a secret. Clutching the envelope and the bills, she cast one last glance around the opulent room, then slipped quietly out the door, vanishing into the rumor mill of high society with her fortune and her dignity intact. Damien watched the departing figure through the manor's tall window. Once she'd read his brief note, the woman slipped back into her own clothes, hiding any trace of the night's ordeal. She counted the bills on the table, withdrew exactly 100,000 yuan, penned a short thank you letter, and, despite every twinge of pain in her legs, limped away into the dawn. He'd kept his promise, a life-saving bounty of 100,000 yuan, no more, no less. That was the deal. Damien had hidden the rest of the $500,000 as a test. If she'd tried to seize it all, he'd have been forced to prolong her suffering, keep her bound to this place for another month, at least, just to see where her true intentions lay. But she'd only taken what was promised. Damien allowed himself a faint smile. On his desk lay a small, varnished card, the Good Samaritan token he'd intended to send her as a reward. He gathered a flicker of void energy between his fingertips, watched it hiss through the air, and watched the token dissolve into nothing. No grand gestures were needed. The test had been passed, and his peace of mind was reward enough. Damien rang up a cleaning service and scheduled a crew to come by, then settled in to play video games. He'd planned to track down that elusive client yesterday, and, if he'd come up empty, take his bike out for a spin today. Since she did show up, though, he decided to rest for now and see later whether he still felt like pursuing her. In truth, picking up girls was just a hobby Damien dabbled in whenever he grew bored at home. Before he realized it, 4 months had slipped away. In that time, Damien ventured out now and then, but curiously, more and more attractive women came to him for help. Some genuinely needed urgent cash. Others were simply pretty faces. He'd lend a hand, spend an evening in their company, and then let things fade. Everyone could see he was too lazy to get truly involved. One evening, driven by hunger, Damien climbed into his car and headed out for dinner. As he rolled past the neighborhood park, he caught sight of the young woman who had begged him for help months ago. Without thinking, he slammed on the brakes. Damien watched her stride toward the park exit, no longer draped in that ostentatious royal sister guise she'd once favored, no longer relying on overt sex appeal. Instead, she'd settled on light, natural makeup that made her look fresh and youthful. But no matter how skillfully she changed her outward appearance, a man who knew her well wouldn't be fooled, and Damien recognized her at once. If she'd met him for the first time looking like this, he'd have welcomed her warmly. Now, her chestnut hair catching the afternoon sun, she was gently easing a wheelchair down the path. In it sat a dignified middle-aged woman, her mother, Damien realized, humming softly. As soon as the daughter spotted Damien behind the wheel, she held his gaze without hesitation and gave him a bright, knowing smile. Damien inclined his head in acknowledgement, started the engine, and pulled away smoothly. Their unspoken understanding from that stormy night would remain between them, a shared memory neither would mention again. "Sweetheart, do you know that handsome young man?" the woman in the wheelchair asked, her eyes following Damien's car as it slipped out of sight. Her daughter paused, one hand resting on the wheelchair's armrest. "Yes, mother," she replied, her voice soft but certain. "I know him well." Damien Ambalaka was a household name in New York City, a strikingly handsome, fabulously wealthy young gentleman, and as rumors had it, a man who never broke a promise. "He's the talk of every refined circle in town," the young woman said, her eyes alight as they turned from the street to her mother. "I've heard about him everywhere." Her mother raised an eyebrow. "You know of him, but he doesn't know you." The daughter laughed softly. "Oh, but I've asked around. Everyone says he's not only easy on the eyes, but also drives one of the finest sports cars in the city." "Handsome and rich, yes," the mother agreed, folding her arms. "But that doesn't mean he's a perfect gentleman. Don't believe everything you hear." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Even if you did catch his attention, I doubt any young woman could ever truly tame a man like that. You're still so young. Focus on your studies first. Wait a few years before you even consider marriage." "Of course, mother," the daughter replied obediently, though her smile never faded. Unbeknownst to them, Damien, having stopped just a short distance away, had overheard every word. As he eased his sleek midnight blue sports car into motion, a small bemused smile crossed his face. It appeared that word of him had indeed spread far and wide, and perhaps one conversation more than most. I hadn't actually claimed any romantic involvement with him, just offered a few well-chosen compliments, so technically there'd been no breach of contract. No matter. A little kindness on my part only made his choice easier. He could pursue a lovely woman who truly matched his taste. Once Damien understood the real reason behind my words, his mood brightened immediately. Hunger struck him on the spot, and without hesitation, he swung the car around and headed for Chinatown in search of something delicious. Life on Blue Star was undeniably comfortable. Once S-Shield recognized Damien's true identity, even they dared not cross him. That freedom let him relax completely. No more watching his every move, no more worrying about funds. His only daily concern was finding the next bit of fun. In the broader mercenary world, however, rumors still circled around the elusive operator known only as Death. He had vanished nearly 2 years ago, and theories ran wild. Some whispered that the god of death had met an untimely end. More believed he'd simply cashed out and retired. After all, in just a few short years, Death had raked in over 1 billion credits. As long as he lived modestly, he could afford a lifetime of leisure. If he plays his cards right, that kind of money could buy him total financial freedom. And Death's retirement is nothing but good news for the mercenary world. Without the man known as Death cornering every impossible job, there are far more contracts up for grabs. But on Blue Star's darker side, the real winner is Zero, the underworld's top money launderer. Whenever Death sought to clean his ill-gotten gains, other mercenaries slap Ed on exorbitant fees. After all, he could afford private guards by the dozen. When Zero first agreed to handle Death's funds, he charged only his usual rates. Then he witnessed Death's fearsome power and wisely decided not to push his luck. Each time they settled accounts, the payout was enormous, a windfall beyond anything he'd dared hope for. Now that Death has officially retired and is rumored to be scouting for work in New York, Zero is the only person who knows his true identity, and not even a fortune's worth of gold could tempt him to reveal the secret. Chapter 4. Thanks to the good deeds he'd accumulated, if Damien ever found himself in genuine peril, he had a built-in safety net. Even if Death himself retired and erased every trace of his dark web presence, no one could track him down. All Damien would need to do was discover the god of Death's true identity, Damien himself, and offer a king's ransom for his help. Armed with that ultimate trump card, he could confidently face any foe or crisis for the next 60 years, secure in the knowledge that no challenge could overwhelm him, at least not until old age finally caught up. Chapter 139. You Want to Kill Me? Damien could roam free across the globe, but Tony Stark was chained to his workbench, lost in the microscopic worlds of nanotechnology. Earlier that day, S-Shield agent Phil Coulson had dropped by, briefcase in hand and professionalism in his smile. He meant well, but Tony had stonewalled him. "I've got authorization from the Council," Coulson had said, laying out the paperwork. "Preliminary studies on your space fighter. We need your cooperation." Tony raised a calm hand. His tone was gentle, but every word was laced with iron. "No, Phil, you're not getting the space fighter." Coulson's brow creased. "Tony, think about it. with S.H.I.E.L.D.'s resources. You'd turn it into a United Nations asset, Tony interrupted. He stood and began to pace the length of the lab, fingers tapping along the gleaming work surfaces. Then dozens of labs and thousands of scientists worldwide would dissect it. Maybe they won't clone it perfectly, but give them time, and they'll build something better. Advanced weapons, next-generation defense grids. Do you realize what that does to the fragile balance of power on Earth? Global security, Coulson protested. We want to keep everyone safe. Tony stopped. He stared at his visitor with tired eyes. I want to bring humanity into the interstellar age. But if the major powers on Earth get their hands on this tech, they'll tear each other apart first. Bombs will fall, governments will collapse, and the dream of exploring the stars dies in the rubble. Silence stretched between them. Coulson closed his briefcase with a soft click. You're making a dangerous stand, Stark. I know exactly what I'm doing, Tony replied quietly. And if our world plunges into war, I'll just slip away with Damien. At least one of us will survive. Coulson hesitated, then gave a curt nod. I'll report your refusal, but don't think this is the end of it. Once Coulson had gone, Tony returned to his bench. He activated his holo console, and the blue-green glow illuminated the lab. Among the floating schematics and data streams, one figure stood out. Damien, his young protege, eyes alight with curiosity and ambition. Tony watched him for a long moment and then whispered to the empty room, I promise I'll protect your future, kid, even if it kills me. He turned back to his work, ready to defy the world for the chance that humanity and Damien might live to see the stars. Tony's mind churned with a single, nagging worry. What if Blue Star suddenly slipped back to the Stone Age in the middle of a fight? Even if Damien dove in to shield Pepper and him, the planet would be irrevocably altered. He'd already arranged for Renoli and the others to visit Blue Star in the future, but if they ever arrived in the present day, they'd find nothing like the world he'd described. The very thought made Tony cringe. So no matter what S.H.I.E.L.D. demanded, there was no way he'd hand over the alien battlefield breakthroughs he'd amassed. Instead, his nights followed a familiar routine. After dinner with Pepper, he retreated to the lab, poring over diagrams of programmable nanites. If he could perfect a true nanotech suit, every aspect of the armor, its strength, its adaptability, even its stealth protocols, would leap forward. He'd be better prepared for any threat, and could keep his identity buried far beneath layers of self-assembling metal. And yet, amidst all this scheming, Tony couldn't help but glance at Damien's latest holovids. For months now, Damien had lived like royalty under Blue Star's alien suns, roaming its crystal forests, picking up companions wherever he pleased. As New York's most celebrated playboy, Tony prided himself on his roster of conquests. Still, watching Damien's carefree exploits only deepened the envy in his chest. For once, Tony Stark wished he could trade places with someone else's reputation and their freedom. Damien knew better than to argue with Pepper, so he kept his secret that he'd somehow become younger on Blue Star, tightly sealed. He forced down his ointment, publicly at least. He made no mention of how frustrated he felt. In private, though, all he wanted was to hop a ship to Xandar Star and chase after new adventures and new company. But there was an even more pressing concern. Word had reached them that an alien force was planning to invade Blue Star before the year's end. If that threat didn't exist, Damien would only have needed to stay another 2 months, or at most 6, to convince Pepper to leave the system with him and explore the galaxy together. Until then, Damien relied on Jarvis to keep watch. He had the AI scour the skies above every major nation, around the clock, for any sign of hostile spacecraft. After all, even the most advanced warships leave traces, energy signatures, orbital disturbances, transmission pings, and at the first hint of an approach, Damien intended to strike first. He was determined to unmask whoever was foolish enough to challenge Blue Star without first checking its defenses. In the 2 years since enlisting with the Void, Damien had learned discretion, and though he'd been off-world for the past year, Pepper had managed to erase all records of his earlier escapades. Still, every so often, he could not resist slipping out into the night sky, to patrol, to hunt, or simply to remind himself that the universe was vast, and that one day soon he and Pepper might roam it together. That same afternoon, Tony Stark, suited up in his Iron Man armor, was cruising just above the city streets when Jarvis's calm voice cut through his HUD. Warning, unidentified hostile attack incoming. Without hesitation, Tony punched the thrusters and rocketed skyward. The very moment he cleared the rooftops, a crackling electric whip lashed down where he'd been hovering only seconds before. Tony hovered, scanning for the source. Below him stood a gaunt man with wild, unkempt hair and a ragged coat. A strange arc reactor pulsed at his chest, and in his hand glowed that deadly whip of pure electricity. The intruder's eyes burned with fury as he stared up at Iron Man. "Jarvis," Tony said, raising a gauntlet to his helmet's comms. "Who the hell is this guy?" "Scanning now," Jarvis replied. "Subject identified, Ivan Vanko, son of Anton Vanko, the physicist once affiliated with S-Shield." "Anton Vanko?" Tony frowned. "The guy was labeled a traitor, wasn't he? What's his beef with me?" "Limited archival records," Jarvis reported. "Anton Vanko collaborated with your father, Howard Stark, on early micro-arc reactor research. Beyond that, details are scarce." Tony clenched his jaw, eyeing the crackling whip. "All right, Jarvis, let's see what he's really after." "Jarvis, decide for me. Is this Ivan Vanko a threat?" "I'm on it, sir." Jarvis's voice came from every speaker in the workshop as a cascade of images and data streams unfolded above Tony's workbench. On Blue Star, nothing that connects to the network escapes his scrutiny. "Tony Stark," Jarvis continued, "all his known actions are under surveillance. Do you want to see the footage? Show me." In an instant, the holographic display switched to several angles of Ivan Vanko standing on the ledge of a nearby skyscraper. Vanko's eyes blazed with hatred, his electrified whips coiled and poised to strike. Tony hovered a dozen stories above the city in his armor, but that, Jarvis confirmed, made him a prime target. Tony studied the scene. If Vanko connected his charged tendrils to the suit's arc reactor, Stark's armor could short out, sending him crashing into the crowded streets below. The collateral damage alone would be catastrophic. The moment of decision passed in an instant. Tony's jaw tightened, and his hand crackled with repulsor energy as he replied to Jarvis, "Lock on to his position. I'm engaging." His eyes, cold and unyielding, met the glowing whip in the hologram. Enemy confirmed. Damien didn't strike back the moment the blow landed. He needed to size up his attacker's identity and intent first. Now it was clear there would be no idle words from Ivan Vanko. Damien and his fellow Renoli bounty hunters had spent the past year locked in one skirmish after another, and they'd learned well the code of Renoli. When someone attacks, your first step is to confirm who they are. If they truly are your enemy, and taking them out won't spark bigger problems, mercy is a liability. As Battlefield lore warns, compassion for your foe is cruelty to yourself. Only if the target holds high rank, whose death would unleash untold chaos, should you consider letting them slip away. Vanko, of course, held no such protection. Still, a full-blown fight in downtown New York was too dangerous. With a hiss of compressed air, the jets beneath Damien's boots ignited. In a single, fluid motion, he seized Vanko by the collar and rocketed upward, leaving the city's streets far below. "What do you want?" Vanko spat, struggling against Damien's unyielding grip. Damien's improvised armor snapped shut around Ivan Vanki, then lurched upward, carrying him skyward. At 10,000 meters, the air grew thin and biting cold. Frost crept across Ivan's hair and eyelashes, crystallizing on his jacket. Wind tore at him, but Damien's voice rang out above the roar. "You tried to kill me with that whip back there," Damien shouted. "Payback's only fair." Suspended high above the clouds, Ivan could do nothing but shiver as the frost claimed him. With a final downward thrust, Damien began his descent, leaving Ivan to contemplate the price of crossing him. Chapter 140, Captain America Isn't Dead? "Spare me. I only wanted to see if the name Iron Man really carries that weight. I never intended to kill you." The words tumbled from Ivan Vanki's lips in a panic as he felt death closing in. If Iron Man had ended him back in New York, Damien knew the fallout would sully his name, if not ruin it outright. Even rumors of such an event would be enough to embarrass him. But by luring Ivan far from the city and away from witnesses, then using his military connections to bury any record of the incident, Damien had ensured no one could trace it back to him. It wasn't dying that terrified Ivan. It was the thought that he wouldn't be the one to take Iron Man down. "Too late for regrets," Damien replied. his voice cold and unwavering. In an instant, the repulsors on his suit flared into an infernal glow. The armor shot forward in a blaze of thrust, shattering the sound barrier with a deafening crack. The resulting shockwave tore through the clearing, hurling Ivan's body into the mud as if he were nothing more than debris. Damien landed with a measured thud. He raised his arm, and the palm-mounted cannon hummed to life. A single, precise shot seared the ground, and Ivan, transforming them into ash and dust. When the smoke cleared, Iron Man was already ascending. His armor's thrusters burned bright as he set a direct course back to New York City. Damien glanced up from the holographic display just as Tony Stark strode into the penthouse suite. Minutes earlier, he'd seen Stark deliver a single, fatal shot to Ivan Vanko. The would-be mastermind's plan to weaponize his genius into an ironclad army and challenge Stark Industries had fallen apart in an instant. Originally, Thor, the god of thunder, was due to arrive any moment. Though Stark's decisive action had derailed Vanko's scheme, it only confirmed that more of Earth's mightiest heroes, Thor, and soon Captain America, would turn their attention this way. Damien leaned back in his chair, tapping a finger against his lips. Not long ago, even if Vanko had come close to killing Stark, the worst Tony could have done was lock him up. But the moment Stark learned Vanko intended to murder him, he showed no mercy. Since joining the Void Cult, Stark's trademark charm had given way to cold efficiency, and while Damien noted the change, he didn't begrudge it. So long as Stark honored the cult's strictures, his hard edge was irrelevant. A distant rumble rolled through the night sky. Thor's arrival was imminent. Damien shut off the external feed and refocused on the game glowing before him. The tactics on the board were tight, every move critical. He settled deeper into his chair, fingers poised over the next holographic piece. Outside, the world was shifting. Inside, the match continued. In 2011, the Marvel Universe looked radically different from what fans had known before. But in one respect, nothing had really changed. There were still plenty of new video games to play. For Damien, these releases were a godsend, an endless source of distraction and amusement between one world-saving crisis and the next. What most of America didn't know was that Tony Stark had recently taken a life, but S.H.I.E.L.D.'s censors hadn't missed a thing. Deep inside the agency's headquarters, Nick Fury stared at the data feeds again and again, trying to reconcile the cold efficiency of Iron Man with the man he'd always trusted. Tony Stark was, after all, the only child of Howard Stark, one of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s founders, a heritage that ought to have guaranteed a close working relationship. As long as both sides kept their cards on the table, Tony couldn't move against S.H.I.E.L.D. any more than S.H.I.E.L.D. could move against him. Then Tony met Damien, and everything changed. At first, Stark had agreed to a formal alliance with S.H.I.E.L.D., signing a contract that spelled out clear limits. If the threat didn't involve superpowered foes or an extraterrestrial emergency, S.H.I.E.L.D. was forbidden from calling on Iron Man. No S.H.I.E.L.D. agent could set foot on Stark Manor without explicit invitation. And if Stark-Eve decided he'd had enough, if he felt S.H.I.E.L.D. was overstepping, he could walk away from the Avengers entirely. Those clauses were supposed to protect both Tony's independence and S.H.I.E.L.D.'s authority. But ever since Damien entered Stark's life, Tony's priorities had shifted in ways that neither Fury nor anyone else could have predicted. Control of the operation no longer lay with him. It was all Tony now. As the new leader, he'd grown far more decisive, and everyone would have to learn to work with his style. Just then, Nick Fury's secure line buzzed with an encrypted message. Fury's eyes narrowed as he read it. A surge of confidence washed over him. He finally had a reliable combat force at his disposal. That evening, Tony strode through his front door to be met by Pepper. Her brow furrowed the moment she caught sight of him. "Tony," she asked, nose wrinkling, "why do you smell like you've been in a fight?" He shrugged off his jacket and set it aside. "A guy tried to ambush me at the lab, didn't see it coming, so I hit him pretty hard." Pepper crossed her arms. "You're unbelievably low-key about these things. How do you keep offending people without even realizing it?" Tony raised an eyebrow. "Jarvis, would you mind explaining to Pepper what happened?" A familiar, polite tone responded, "Of course, Mr. Stark. Miss Potts, the attacker was the son of Anton Vanko, the same Anton Vanko who once clashed with Howard Stark, Tony's father." Pepper's eyes widened as the pieces clicked into place. Tony merely smirked, already moving on to his next problem. After all, with Fury finally on board, they had bigger battles ahead. Damien was slaughtering innocents without mercy. In response, Jarvis released a trove of classified data, along with raw footage of Ivan Vanke's initial attack, and laid out the entire chain of events. "So that's the full picture," Damien said flatly. "Now get the armor cleaned. I can't stand the smell of blood." Pepper gave a curt nod. "I'm not fond of it either. I've already tasked Jarvis too with the cleanup." Damien shrugged out of his protective plating and stepped out of the underground lab in loose, comfortable clothes. Since bonding with the Void, his senses had sharpened to an almost painful degree. He could detect even the faintest metallic tang in the air. Blood clinging to his armor felt positively overwhelming. While he wasn't a full-blown misophobe, he was definitely uncomfortable around traces of gore. As he and Pepper exchanged a few more words, Jarvis's calm tone filled the room. "Sir, I've intercepted S-Yield communication. They believe they've located Captain America." Damien paused, brow furrowing. Thanks to his always-on link with Jarvis, any S-Shield dispatch, whether monitored or routed through mobile networks, had to pass through his firewall first. He looked at Pepper. "They found him? Where?" Damien sat at his console in Tony's lab, fingers flying over the holographic display as he rerouted a low-level S.H.I.E.L.D. transmission into Jarvis's queue. The message wasn't highly classified, only a handful of agents had seen it, but it was enough for Jarvis to intercept. Jarvis's calm voice filled the room. "Sir, I've just decoded a S.H.I.E.L.D. report regarding the discovery of Captain America." Tony glanced up from his reactor schematic, brow raised. "Captain America?" He paused, then smirked. "Isn't that the guy whose statue sits in the museum?" Damien nodded. S.H.I.E.L.D. found him encased in ice, just like the old stories said. They're transporting him back to New York now. Tony leaned forward, intrigued. Ordinarily, anyone frozen solid would be toast. Do they really think he survived? According to the report, Damien replied, he was injected with an experimental serum before the ice took hold. That super soldier formula kept him alive, frozen, but alive. Jarvis chimed in. To clarify, a man who disappeared over 70 years ago has just been discovered, perfectly preserved in frozen stasis, and now he's waking up in our era. Tony whistled soft. Eli, an original from my father's time, stumbling into the 21st century. I have to admit, I'm impressed and more than a little curious. Damien exchanged a look with Tony. This could change everything, sir. Tony grinned, tapping a finger against his helmet design on the holo display. Then let's make sure we're ready for it.